Chapter 851. Late at night, outside the Mahist army's camp, a group of agile men dressed in black silently snuck in. Although this was not the main camp of the Mahist army that Prince Ding personally oversaw, the main camp was only 20 or so li away and was closely connected to the main camp. Moreover, this was the place where most of the rations were stored. It was not an exaggeration to say that this was the Mahist army's frontline supply granary, and the tight security was self-evident. However, these people were able to sneak in without alerting anyone, and this was enough to show how outstanding their abilities were. In the quiet camp, other than the patrolling soldiers coming and going, all of the soldiers had already fallen asleep. In the darkness of the night, only the cawing of the night crows could be heard from time to time, making people feel a sense of unease. The leader raised his hand to stop the people behind him from moving forward, and looked around vigilantly. Suddenly he said in a low and hurried voice, "We've been discovered, retreat." The others were also startled, and before they could react, a rain of silver arrows pierced through the night sky. Retreat. The men in black were all skilled, and almost at the same time, they scattered in all directions. The barracks were immediately lit up. A man dressed in black walked out from the darkness, and a cold smile appeared on his lips. "Since you've come, don't leave. Chase." Countless black figures streaked across the hidden corners of the camp, chasing in the direction of the fleeing black-clothed men. These men in black did not immediately escape, and instead ran all over the place, and many of them even headed towards the area where the rations were stored. It was clear that they wanted to destroy most of the Mahist army's rations in one fell swoop. It had to be known that before the army moved, the rations would move first. In this era, when two armies fought, other than fighting strength and tactics, they also competed with rations. Without rations, even if you were the strongest soldier in the world, you would only end up starving to death. Their plan was very good, but how could the Mahist army, which had been around for hundreds of years, not have considered this problem? As soon as they entered the storage area, they were surrounded by a group of equally mysterious black-clothed men. Both sides attacked each other without saying a word. Not far away from the camp, Su Qingfeng was standing at the edge of a cliff, dressed in black, looking down at the camp with a gloomy face. Standing next to him were the unrestrained Han Mingxi and the graceful Han Mingyue brothers. Behind them stood a group of men in black who were also eyeing the flickering flames of the camp not far away. "What a nice place." Han Mingxi smiled at Su Qingfeng. Originally, he and Han Mingyue had been ordered to escort the provisions over, but they didn't expect to see such a good show. Han Mingyue pondered for a moment before saying, "These people seem to act in a similar way as Qi Lin." Su Qingfeng said proudly, "I'm just copying the wisdom of others. Painting the skin of a tiger is difficult to paint the bones. For the northern tribes to be able to do this, it's not bad. Since they provoked us first, it's not right if we don't teach them a lesson." "Man." "Commander." A black-clothed man stepped forward and bowed. Su Qingfeng said, "There's a northern tribes camp 60 miles away from here. Why don't you guys go and have some fun?" "Yes, Commander." The black-clothed man replied. With a wave of his hand, he disappeared into the night with the other black-clothed men. The rest of them didn't say anything else and looked down at the camp below. This place looked ordinary, but standing on the cliff, one could take in the entire camp. In this way, no matter how powerful the northern tribes were, they wouldn't be able to escape Qi Lin's eyes. "They're retreating." The northern tribes knew that they couldn't succeed, and they were sent here to test the waters. If they could burn the provisions of the Mahist army, it would be a good thing, but if they couldn't, it didn't matter. Seeing that they couldn't gain the upper hand, they immediately prepared to retreat. Su Qingfeng rubbed his chin and laughed. "Since they were sent here to test us, we'll just let one of them go. Kill the rest." Han Mingxi, who was standing by the side, couldn't help but twitch his mouth. Letting one of them go was more embarrassing than letting none of them go. It was obvious that he was telling the northern tribes that since they had sent someone to investigate, he would leave one person to report back to them. He was not afraid of them investigating. Originally, he thought that among the brothers of the Su family, Su Qingfeng was the kindest. He didn't expect him to be such a bad person. The northern tribes wanted to escape, so Qi Lin let them go. However, they didn't let them go. Instead, they moved the battlefield outside the camp. There were originally more than 20 black-clothed men, but they were soon split up and fought their own battles. In less than an hour, the brightly lit camp returned to silence. In the darkness, 3 black-clothed men ran frantically in the direction of the northern tribes' camp. In such a moonless night, although there were some stars, it was not enough to illuminate the path ahead. The 3 of them ran through the forest in a panic, not knowing where to go, and actually lost their way. They stopped and looked in the direction they came from. It seemed that no one was chasing them, so they heaved a sigh of relief. One of them couldn't help but say, "I didn't expect these Central Plains people to be so powerful." They were carefully trained by Helian Zhen and Helian Peng over the past few years. They were much more powerful than the average Northern Tribe soldiers. The people of the Northern Tribes were known for their martial prowess. These soldiers of the Yazzie army even looked down on the ordinary soldiers of the Northern Tribes, let alone the people of the Central Plains who had always been weak. However, they didn't expect the Yazzie army to be so powerful that they couldn't even gain an advantage in a one-on-one battle. They were even at a disadvantage. That's because the Central Plains people are cunning and set up an ambush. Another person refused to admit defeat. His skills were above the rest, and he wasn't at a disadvantage when fighting against the Mahist army. It was just that they were outnumbered and had no choice but to escape. Naturally, he refused to admit defeat. The remaining person couldn't help but frown and say, "We seem to be lost. It's better to return to the camp quickly." The other two nodded in agreement. They had been running in the forest for more than 2 hours, but they still couldn't find the way out. It was obvious that they were lost in the forest. The elite Yazzie army of the Northern Tribes actually got lost. What a joke. In the forest, a burst of hearty laughter came from the darkness. However, it was erratic and no one could determine the source of the laughter. The three of them changed their expressions. "Who is it? How do you know about Yazzie?" Yazzie was Helian Zhen's secret trump card. Not to mention outsiders, even the king of the Northern Tribes and Yelu Yi didn't know about it beforehand. They didn't expect the other party to expose their identities. The person laughed and said, "How can the Mahist army not know about any barbarian who dares to step into the Central Plains?" "Qilin." The three of them said in unison. They stared at the void in the darkness with vigilance. "Qilin. Didn't you want to experience the power of my Qilin? Why are you leaving?" The person in the darkness laughed. The leader of the men in black said sternly, "Come out and fight if you have the ability. Do you Central Plains people only know how to sneak around?" The man in the darkness laughed coldly and said, "I'm just about to teach you a lesson." A black shadow shot out like a ray of light. The three men from the Northern Tribes didn't even get to see the person's face clearly. The man in the lead only felt a chill on his neck. A cold hand was strangling his neck. With a slight force, the man from the Northern Tribes made a gurgling sound and fell to the ground, lifeless. Chapter 852. The remaining two men from the Northern Tribes roared angrily and charged at the black figure. The black figure snorted and a cold light flashed. The cold light of the soft sword danced in the night like a dazzling flower. In just a moment another person fell to the ground. The remaining man from the Northern Tribes was scared out of his wits. As long as one was human, one would be afraid of death. Even though the Northern Tribes were more courageous than the people of the Central Plains, it did not mean that they were less afraid of death. If it was on the battlefield, the two armies might not care about life and death. However, in the darkness of the night, facing this mysterious black figure and the corpses of two of his comrades lying beside him, the man from the Northern Tribes, who had been running for more than 2 hours, finally had a mental breakdown. He roared angrily and charged at the black figure without caring about the difference in skill. The black figure laughed coldly and appeared behind the man from the Northern Tribes. His palm landed on the back of the man's neck. The man from the Northern Tribes fell to the ground in a daze. The forest regained its peace. The man in black kept his soft sword and turned to walk out of the forest. Outside the forest, Su Qingfeng, Han Mingxi and the rest were already waiting there. Walking out of the dark forest, a handsome face was revealed under the starlight. Who else could it be but Zhuojing? Han Mingxi leaned against a tree and yawned in boredom. Just 3 escaped thieves. Is there a need for Princess Ding's most trusted aide to personally deal with them? Making a mountain out of a molehill. Zhuojing ignored Han Mingxi's mockery and said lightly, "The princess consort only wants to know how strong these people are." Su Qingfeng asked curiously, "How is it?" They had watched the battle from beginning to end. Naturally, they could see that these people's strength was not far from Qilin's. He was indeed worthy of being trained by Helian Zhen after spending countless years and countless efforts. Zhuojing smiled. Their skills are not bad. However, they are lacking in other aspects. In Qilin's training, individual skills were important. However, it was not absolute. Among the Qilins, there were also some whose skills were only slightly better than ordinary soldiers. However, he had a specialty that no one else could match. Moreover, Qilin was good at teamwork. If one was surrounded by them, even if one was a top expert in the world, it would not be easy to escape. Other than that, there were also various skills training sessions. Tonight's incident where the northern tribes got lost in the forest would never happen to Qilin. Furthermore, the mental fortitude of these northern tribes members was not as good as the members of Qilin. In the past few years, Qilin had gradually formed a standardized system under the leadership of Qin Feng and the others. Every officially selected member had emerged from various desperate situations. He would only become stronger when encountering a strong opponent, and he would only become calmer when facing a dangerous situation instead of going crazy for no reason. Su Qingfeng nodded and said, "That's good. Let's go back to." Helian Peng and Yelu Yi were sitting in the middle of the big tent, waiting for news. Yelu Ye's sword-like eyebrows furrowed, his heart a little uneasy. Since the start of the battle with the Mahist army, he had always been a little worried about Yi Li's Qilin. Although Qilin hadn't made any moves, their reputation of never missing a target cast a shadow of uneasiness in his heart. If Helian Peng's Yazi could restrain Qilin, he would naturally have less scruples when leading the army into battle. Looking at the sky that was about to brighten, Yelu Yi sighed in disappointment and said, "Looks like it's not impossible." Helian Peng's face did not show any anxiety and said indifferently, "Your Highness does not need to worry, these people's failure is expected. If the Mahist army can't even deal with this small accident, then the Mahist army is too weak. This time I just want to know how strong the Mahist army's Qilin is." Hearing Helian Peng's words, Yelu Yi also relaxed. He said, "Helian, it's good that you know. Although Yi Li is a woman, she is not as easy to deal with as Mo Xiaoyao. Helian, you must be careful." Helian Peng looked at Yelu Yi with some surprise. He was surprised that Yelu Yi valued Yi Li so much. Even if Yelu Yi did not say it, he would definitely not underestimate Yi Li. Yelu Yi smiled bitterly and shook his head, saying, "I also only figured it out in the past 2 days. Ren Qining lost to Yi Li. I'm afraid that when Ren Qining first arrived in Glass City, Yi Li had already started scheming. These are all things that Mo Xiaoyao and Su Qingchen cannot interfere with. Also, when Yi Li defeated Lei Jinting in the northwest, many people say it was an accident. However, there is a saying in the Central Plains that when many accidents are stacked together, they are no longer accidents, but premeditated." Helian Peng nodded in agreement. "Your Highness is right. In the past 2 years, I have also seriously studied the battle where Yi Li defeated Lei Jinting. It was clearly Yi Li deliberately showing weakness, luring Lei Jinting's army into the hinterland and cutting off his supplies from the rear. She even gave up Xinyang City to destroy the Xiling army's most elite forces. Lei Jinting's defeat was not unjust. Princess Ding is a woman, but her foresight, scheming, decisiveness and courage are all perfect. If not for the fact that she is a woman, I'm afraid there would be one more contender for hegemony in the Central Plains." The two of them fell silent. When they thought about the current situation, they could not help but sigh. The Central Plains was truly a land of heroes. If the northern tribes wanted to conquer the Central Plains, the road ahead would be difficult. "Reporting to Your Highness, General Helian, the men we sent out last night have returned," someone reported from outside the tent. Yelu Yi stood up and asked, "How many came back?" The guard outside the tent hesitated for a moment before replying, "Your Highness, only one person came back." One person. Not only Yelu Yi but even Helian Peng was shocked. Although they had talked about Yazi's defeat tonight, it could be considered a lesson for his arrogant subordinates. But even Helian Peng did not expect that only one person would come back alive. Originally, he had thought that even if these people could not defeat the Mahist army, they would at least be able to escape. "Let him in," Helian Peng said in a low voice. Not long after, a black-clothed man walked in looking disheveled. He knelt in front of Yelu Yi and Helian Peng. "This subordinate greets Your Highness, General." Helian Peng frowned and asked, "What happened?" The black-clothed man recounted what had happened last night. It turned out that this black-clothed man was the last one to be knocked unconscious by Zhuojing in the forest. At that time, Zhuojing did not hit him too hard, so it did not take long for him to win. He stumbled out of the forest, and when he returned to the northern tribe's camp, the sky was already bright. Helian Peng and Yelu Ye's expressions turned even uglier. How was this the last one who had escaped? This last one was obviously the Mahist army deliberately letting him go so that he could report back. When the black-clothed man finished speaking, Helian Peng stood up and slashed his sword across the black-clothed man's neck. The black-clothed man's eyes widened, and he fell to the ground, dying with his eyes wide open. He did not die in the hands of the enemy, but in the end he died in the hands of the person who had trained him. Chapter 853. Helian Peng wiped off the blood on his sword and said coldly, "Since you are the only one left, there is no need to go back. Although he wanted to suppress their arrogance last night, such a crushing defeat was not a lesson for them, it was a complete blow to their morale. If they were allowed to return to Yazzie and these things were spread out, it would definitely cause Yazzie to have a natural fear of the Mo army and the Qilin, which would be very disadvantageous to the war. There was a saying in the Central Plains that was correct. Ignorance is bliss. Your Highness, General Yi, he sent someone to report that his camp was attacked last night. 2 granaries were burned. The soldier outside hurried in and reported. Yelu Ye's face darkened as he gritted his teeth and said, Qilin. Helian Peng lowered his eyes and said in a low voice, so quick to retaliate as expected of the Mahist army. Yelu Yi said coldly, Helian, I don't care what method you use, you must get rid of Qilin for I as soon as possible. Otherwise they will become a threat to I sooner or later. Compared to the Mahist army, provisions were more important to the northern tribes' army. Even if the Mahist army ran out of provisions, they could still think of ways to get more from other places. The area controlled by the Prince Ding mansion spanned across the original Dechu state and Xiling state. It was not considered small compared to the original Dechu state. Even if it did not include the granaries of Dechu state such as Jiangnan, it was still easy to gather provisions for a few 100,000 soldiers. However, the royal house of the northern tribes was thousands of miles away from Dechu state, and the northern tribes did not produce any provisions. They could only rob the people in the pass. However, when they first entered the pass, they killed more than half of the people in the north. After 2 years, the people in the north could be said to be less than 1 in 10. How could there be so much food for them to rob? Although he had only lost 2 small granaries, it still made Yelu Yi flustered and exasperated, and he flew into a thunderous rage. Helian Peng replied, 7th Prince, please rest assured. I hope you won't disappoint I, Yelu Yi said in a deep voice. In the Mahist army's camp, Yi Li couldn't help but smile after hearing Zhuo Jing's report. She said, this Helian Peng is quite interesting. Mo Xiaoyao snorted unhappily, what's the point? I don't have that kind of skill to create those things that only know how to do it, but I don't know how to do it. Hundreds of thousands of elite soldiers have already been trained. There was no concept of special operations in this era. Other than Yi Li, there was no one else who could come up with a unique combat direction, combat theory and training method. In Mo Xiaoyao's opinion, Helian Peng's so-called Yazzie might not even be as good as the original shadow guard of the Prince Ding mansion. The most important thing was that Helian Peng didn't have a clear idea of what Yazzie was used for. Now it seemed like it was purely to go against Qilin. But they were not Qilin's match. This meant that Helian Zhen and Helian Peng had wasted a lot of effort. Yi Li smiled faintly and said, since Helian Peng has this idea, it's clearly aimed at me. Let me deal with this rising general of the northern tribes. Mo Xiaoyao thought for a moment before nodding and saying, that's good. When Isu comes, let him follow you. Also, Yun Ting Chen Yun, you two should follow Wang Fei. Yes, Prince. Yun Ting and Chen Yun stepped out of the crowd and bowed in response. Yun Ting had been brought back by Yi Li from the Mahist army under Yonglin Murong-shen. Chen Yun admired this young Wang Fei very much. Since Mo Xiaoyao had ordered, the two naturally agreed happily. Yi Li nodded in agreement. The generals below looked at each other and had a deeper understanding of Yi Li's position. Hisu was Princess Ding's shadow guard. Now he had 300,000 soldiers in his hands. Compared to the other old generals of the Prince Ding mansion, he was not lacking at all. This time he had followed Princess Ding to pacify the north. Prince still had Hisu follow Wang Fei. It was clear that he wanted to give Hisu and his soldiers to Wang Fei to control. He would become Princess Ding's trusted soldier. What was the most important thing in this world? Naturally, it was military power. Prince could even share military power with Wang Fei. What else could he not give? Right now, the Prince Ding mansion and the northern tribes were in a full-scale war. The entire battlefield stretched from Feihong Pass to the Chu capital. The entire battlefront took up more than half of the Dechu state's northern territory. Naturally, it could not be all around one place. The Mahist army was also divided into left, middle, and right. The right army was led by Yi Li and was stationed at Lingjiu Mountain near Feihong Pass. The left army was led by Lu Jingxian and was stationed at the city of Brisk, 100 li away from the Chu capital. Mo Xiaoyao was in the middle army, guarding the Mahist army's middle camp. Therefore, Yi Li had just returned from the north and had to leave again after a few days of rest. If Yi Li was willing, she could stay in the camp with Mo Xiaoyao. Even if Yi Li did nothing, the Mahist army would not have any complaints about this Wang Fei. But Yi Li did not want to do that. She did not go to the battlefield to gain the Mahist army's approval. She did it because she liked it. Even after a lifetime, the valiance of being born into a military family had never been erased. So everyone in the world felt that Ding Wangfei was a scholarly and talented woman on the outside, but her actions were more like a descendant of a general. Outside the Mo family army's barracks, Zhuo Jing, Qin Feng, and the others were standing far away. They were looking at the sky and the earth, but they didn't look at their wise and mighty Prince Ding, who looked down on the world. Lin Han looked at the sky and rubbed his nose. He signaled Qin Feng with his eyes, "Are we leaving or not? It's getting dark." Qin Feng rubbed his nose and rolled his eyes. "How would I know?" Zhuo Jing looked down. "If we can't leave today, we'll leave tomorrow. The prince and Wang Fei are not in a hurry, why should we be?" Feng Zhiyao, who had come to send them off, looked awkwardly at a certain person. He decided that his relationship with Qin Feng and the others was better than his relationship with Princess Ding. Therefore he should send them off. The four looked at each other expressionlessly, but they were all complaining in their hearts. What sin did I commit in my past life to be enslaved by this kind of person for half my life? If outsiders saw this, I would lose all my face. On the other side, Yi Li looked helplessly at a certain person who was looking at her. She sighed, "Xiuyao, I should go." Mo Xiuyao said with some bitterness, "Li just came back. Can't she stay with me in the army? I'll let Nan Ho go to Lingjiu Mountain for a while, okay?" Yi Li said softly, "We've already agreed on this. You can go back on your words." "I will go back on my words." Mo Xiuyao said confidently, "I will order Nan Ho and his son to go to Lingjiu Mountain immediately." Yi Li looked at the sky and rolled her eyes. What's with this bad habit of acting like a spoiled child for no reason? She had never seen him act so strangely in front of others. "Are you the same age as Mo Xiaobao? Mo Xiaobao doesn't go back on his words like you do. Be good, quickly defeat the northern tribes and everything will be fine." Mo Xiuyao hugged her in his arms and said gloomily, "Li Li lied to me. After defeating the northern tribes, there's still Lei Jinting and maybe Mo Jingli. Why won't they die?" Mo Xiuyao said gloomily as he buried his eyes in Yi Li's shoulder. Yi Li sighed softly, "They will die. Stop messing around. I should go." Chapter 854. After much persuasion, Mo Xiuyao finally let go of Yi Li. His expression was dark as he watched her get on the horse and leave. Standing at the side, Feng Zhiyao couldn't help but laugh in a low voice. "Prince, it's not the first time Wang Fei has gone out. Is there a need to be so reluctant to part? Most importantly, you can change your image so casually. Not to mention your subordinates, even I, who grew up with you, find it hard to accept. If you have the time to joke around, why don't you hurry up and kill Yelu Yi for this king?" Mo Xiuyao indifferently glanced at Feng Zhiyao, snorted coldly, and left with a flick of his sleeve. There was no trace of the harmless appearance he had in front of Yi Li. Feng Zhiyao snorted. He held his chest and helplessly shook his head with a bitter smile. He really valued love over friendship. Even if he was angry, he didn't need to vent it on an innocent passerby like him. If you didn't want Wang Fei to leave, you shouldn't have agreed in the beginning. Feng Zhiyao cursed silently in his heart, but he could only follow helplessly. Who told him to be so unlucky to have made such a careless friend? Yi Li's group left the Mahist army's camp and quickly rode to the Spirit Vulture Mountain camp. This was not only the closest place to Feihong Pass, but also the closest place to the area controlled by Lei Jinting. Lei Jinting had hundreds of thousands of soldiers at the border. Even though West Hill was very busy right now, no one knew if Lei Jinting would intervene when the Mahist army and the northern tribes were fighting fiercely. The reason why Yi Li was personally stationed here was to prepare for any accidents that might happen. Spirit Vulture Mountain was more than 200 li from the Mahist army's camp. Even if Yi Li's group rode fast, they would only arrive at night. However, there were people guarding the camp, and old General Yuan Pei was at Feihong Pass, so Yi Li and the others were not in a hurry. The group of people rode on their horses, heading towards Spirit Vulture Mountain at a leisurely pace. When they reached a mountain stream, Qin Feng took the lead and pulled on the reins. The galloping horse was suddenly pulled by the reins. The horse neighed and reared up on its hind legs. It circled around in place for a few steps before coming to a stop. Yi Li and the others who were following behind him naturally stopped as well. "Who are you? Please show yourself," Qin Feng said loudly, his voice echoing strangely in the mountain stream. "Ah, Princess Ding, I've heard a lot about you. Now that I've met you today, you really do live up to your reputation." On the mountain road in front of them, a young man wearing a battle robe and holding a long saber appeared. He had a vigorous aura around him. He laughed heartily as he cupped his hands in greeting towards Yi Li. Yi Li frowned slightly. She patted her horse forward and smiled indifferently. "General Helin, nice to meet you. The smile on Helian Peng's face faded slightly. Princess Ding has good eyesight. Yi Li smiled faintly. Who else but General Helian would dare to lead troops to block the road under the control of my Mahist army? Did General Helian also bring your Yizi today? Helian Peng's eyelids twitched when he heard Yi Li's words. Last time, he had underestimated the strength of the Mahist army, causing the people he sent out to be completely wiped out. Although he had only sent out a few dozen people to test the waters, it wasn't a glorious battle record to have them completely wiped out. He said in a low voice, this one did indeed bring Yizi here. However, it seems that Princess Consort didn't bring Qilin with her. It's really regrettable. Does Princess Consort think that this place is under the control of the Mahist army and that there isn't the slightest bit of danger to run amok? How would this consort dare to have such thoughts? Even if I'm sitting at home, trouble will still come knocking. However, this consort can't possibly not even leave the house because of this, right? Wouldn't that be like giving up eating for fear of choking? Yi Li said with a smile. Helian Peng looked thoughtfully at the white-clothed woman in front of him. Compared to the women of the northern tribes, the women of the Central Plains didn't look old. If she was in the northern tribes, Yi Li would look like she was only 17 or 18 years old. She was dressed in simple snow-white clothes and her black hair was casually tied up. Her snow-white clothes fluttered in the wind and her hair danced in the wind. She looked like the legendary snow goddess. Since this one is here, I would like to invite Princess Consort to the northern tribes as a guest. I hope Princess Consort will do me the honor. Helian Peng said in a low voice. Hearing this, Qin Feng, Zhuo Jing, and the others looked at Helian Peng with even more sinister and fierce gazes. Several people patted their horses and stepped forward to block Yi Li. When Helian Peng saw this, he didn't care. He laughed and waved his hand. A group of black-clothed people appeared on the mountain path. At a glance, there were more than 100 people. Helian Peng looked at Yi Li and said seriously, I hope Princess Consort will do me the honor. Qin Feng laughed coldly and said, You want to take Princess Consort away with just these few people? Your Excellency is too arrogant. Helian Peng raised his eyebrows and glanced at Qin Feng and the others. May I ask who these people are? Naturally, he could tell that the aura of Qin Feng and the others were definitely not as simple as ordinary guards. It was a pity that the intelligence of the northern tribes was not as accurate as the Mahist army. They couldn't even recognize the few people that Yi Li trusted the most. Qin Feng said lightly, General Helian doesn't have to worry about nameless people. However, if General Helian wants to invite Princess Consort over as a guest, you have to ask me first. Helian Peng grinned and said, Is that so? If that's the case, go. The men in black behind him received the order and immediately surrounded Yi Li and the others. Qin Feng, Lin Han and the others charged forward, while Zhuo Jing retreated to Yi Li's side and didn't make a move. The people that Yi Li brought out, including Qin Feng, Yun Ting, Chen Yun and the others, were only slightly more than 10 people. It was naturally difficult for them to fight against the hundreds of people under Helian Peng. However, these people were the best of the best. They were able to hold their own against so many people and did not fall into a disadvantageous position. Seeing this, even Helian Peng couldn't help but change his expression. He didn't know if these people were specially sent by Emo Xiuyao to protect Yi Li or if the Mahist army's fighting strength was so strong. If it was the latter, the northern tribes' army's ending would be worrying. As expected of the elites of the Mahist army, their skills are extraordinary. Helian Peng praised loudly, Princess Consort, no matter how strong your people are, I'm afraid they won't be able to defend against so many people. Why let your subordinates sacrifice themselves? This one is sincerely inviting Princess Consort to the northern tribes as a guest. Why won't Princess Consort give me face? Helian Peng's appearance wasn't considered handsome, but he had a valiant aura that was rarely seen in men of the Central Plains. However, he spoke such cultured words that gave people a strange feeling of incongruity. Yi Li smiled faintly and said, General Helian seems to be very interested in this consort's Qilin? Helian Peng raised an eyebrow and said with a smile, I'm ashamed to say this, but this one is very interested. Princess Consort was able to train such a mysterious troop that is even stronger than the Mahist army's trump card, the Black Cloud Cavalry. How can this one not be impressed? I wanted to ask Princess Consort for advice. Yi Li nodded and said, Since it's like this, then this consort will tell you Qilin, how to use it. Before he could finish his sentence, Yi Li waved her hand and a sharp whistling sound pierced through the air. A green flash shot into the sky and instantly bloomed into green fireworks in the sky. A moment later, a few places not far away also lit up with dark green flames. Chapter 855. Helian Peng's face darkened and he said coldly, "Why is there Qi Lin here? Did Princess Consort predict that I would be waiting here?" The two fireworks were obviously the Mahist army responding to Yi Li's summons. The one who would do this was most likely Qi Lin. Yi Li shook her head and said with a smile, "General, do you really think that I can predict things? Qi Lin's function is to be everywhere at any time. This is a battlefield. How can they be absent?" Helian Peng laughed coldly. Compared to Qi Lin, his subordinate Yi was indeed not as good. But it didn't matter. "Then Princess Consort, why don't you see if they can save you in time?" Helian Peng flew up and pounced towards Yi Li. What was surprising was that Helian Peng was not like the other northern tribes people who only focused on external martial arts. On the contrary, he also practiced internal martial arts of the Central Plains, and it seemed that his internal martial arts were not shallow. At least, Yi Li could not see the depth of his internal martial arts. Zhuojing, who was beside Yi Li, leaped up and flew towards him. The two of them exchanged blows in the air. In a flash, they had exchanged more than 10 blows before both of them landed on the ground. Zhuojing's face darkened. Helian Peng's martial arts were beyond his expectations. If it was under normal circumstances, he would have a chance of winning if he teamed up with Qin Feng and Lin Han. But now it was impossible. Helian Peng was very confident in his own martial arts. He had fought with the Mahist army several times before and had not met a worthy opponent, even though Mo Xiaoyao did not make a move. He did not expect that he would be stopped by an inconspicuous bodyguard. Helian Peng laughed coldly and praised, "Good martial arts?" Zhuojing was silent and stared calmly at Helian Peng. Helian Peng snorted and laughed, "Unfortunately, it's still not enough." He ignored Zhuojing and once again pounced towards Yi Li. How could Zhuojing let him succeed? He flew up to block him. On the other side, Yi Li had also jumped down from her horse's back at the same time. The dagger in her hand flashed and stabbed towards Helian Peng's chest. Helian Peng exclaimed in surprise. He raised his hand to grab Yi Li's wrist. However, he saw Yi Li turn her wrist and slash at his wrist. In just a split second, Helian Peng clearly saw the dagger in Yi Li's hand. It wasn't an ordinary dagger but a tri-chested sharp awl. There was even a blood groove on it. If one was pierced by it, even if they didn't die, they would lose half their life. Helian Peng retreated and said with a smile, "Princess Ding is really ruthless." Although Yi Li was a woman, she was not afraid of anyone when it came to close combat. It was just that he started cultivating his inner strength too late, so he couldn't achieve great success in it. Now that they were engaged in close combat, there wasn't much use of internal energy. Although Helian Peng was powerful, he was still far from being able to control his inner strength as he wished. Zhuojing naturally wouldn't let Yi Li fight alone. He flew up with a long sword which was extremely sharp. The sword's aura was overwhelming. The two of them, one from afar and the other from close combat, cooperated well. For a moment Helian Peng couldn't do anything. Helian Peng knew that if he wanted to capture Yi Li, he had to get rid of Zhuojing first. However, with Yi Li here, he couldn't free himself to get rid of Zhuojing. Zhuojing wasn't a good-for-nothing who could be easily defeated by him. Therefore he could only focus on attacking Yi Li. As long as he hurt Yi Li first, he would naturally be free to get rid of Zhuojing. After making up his mind, Helian Peng unsheathed the long sword in his hand. He waved the sword and distanced himself from Yi Li. The long sword danced vigorously in the air, heading towards Yi Li. Yi Li knew that her strength was far inferior to Helian Peng's. She didn't welcome the attack and retreated. Zhuojing moved forward to block Helian Peng's long sword. Yi Li appeared behind him and stabbed the short sword in her hand towards Helian Peng. Helian Peng had been waiting for this moment. He waved the long sword in his hand with all his strength. Even Zhuojing was shaken off by the strong aura of his sword. However, Yi Li, who should have been more seriously injured than Zhuojing, seemed to ignore the sword aura and continued to advance towards Helian Peng. Yi Li's movements were extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, the short sword in her hand had stabbed into Helian Peng's body. Helian Peng didn't have time to be surprised at how Yi Li could resist his strength. His face was already distorted by the intense pain in his body. Zhuojing, who had retreated to one side, waved the long whip in his hand and pulled Yi Li back. Helian Peng steadied himself. When he saw the wounds on his body, he gasped. Although he had dodged a few of them quickly, the broken sword had only pierced through his arm. However, it could be predicted that this arm would not be able to move for the next 2 to 3 months. If it had really pierced his body, even if it had not hit a vital part, he was afraid that no matter how strong his internal energy was, only death would await him. "Princess Consort, you have good skills?" Helian Peng stared at Yi Li, his expression changing. Yi Li's expression was calm as she said lightly, General Helion, you flatter me. Generals' martial arts are extremely rare among the people of the northern tribes. Helion Peng did not hide it. He smiled and said, that's right. This one's martial arts were indeed taught by an expert from the Central Plains. Helion Peng casually pulled out a long cloth and wrapped the bleeding wound as he spoke with a smile. It's not just an expert. This consort knows a few experts from the Central Plains. Helion Peng smiled and said, I am ashamed to say this. My master just happened to die at the hands of Prince Ding. Yi Li frowned slightly and muttered to herself for a moment, Murong Xiong died at the hands of Mo Xiaoyao. Only Murong Xiong would be able to teach such an expert. Moreover, Helion Peng's martial arts were indeed somewhat similar to Murong Xiong's. Helion Peng smiled but did not say anything. He neither admitted nor denied it. Yi Li did not mind and said lightly, General Helion, it's best if you quickly return. Bleeding from an arm can still cause death. Although Helion Peng had bandaged the wound on his arm, it clearly could not stop the bleeding. Not long after, the entire cloth was dyed blood red. Helion Peng laughed bitterly and raised his hand to seal a few more acupuncture points. Just as he was about to speak, he saw a few cold lights flash through the forest in the distance. Several feathered arrows shot towards them. Not far from him, several men in black fell to the ground after being hit by the arrows. Helion Peng's expression changed, they came so quickly. Retreat. Chapter 856. When Helion Peng saw that Qi Lin had arrived and that he was heavily injured, he knew that he would not be able to gain any advantage today. After saying that he was going to retreat, he flew away from the mountain stream, not caring about the lives of the people he brought with him. With the addition of the Qilin, these people were naturally taken care of by everyone without much effort. Qin Feng looked in the direction that Helion Peng left and said regretfully, it's a pity that Helion Peng escaped. Lin Han, who was following behind him, looked at the dead or injured northern tribe soldiers and said, Helion Peng is really ruthless. He sent so many people to their deaths just like that. Helion Peng did not feel any heartache when he threw away the dozens of people from a few days ago and the 100 people today. These people were different from the normal northern tribe soldiers. Every one of them had been specially trained for a long time. Even Helion Peng did not have many such experts. From this, it could be seen that Yi Li and Helion Peng treated their subordinates differently. Qi Lin had been established for many years and the number of casualties was only slightly more than 100. However, Helion Peng could easily kill more than 100 people with just one or two moves. It was obvious that Helion Peng did not treat these people as his elite trump cards or even his own subordinates. At most, they were just some high-level cannon fodder. Zhu Jing was the closest and saw the situation clearly. He said in a low voice, even if we did not kill him, Helion Peng would not be able to jump around for a month or two. Wang Fei, do you want to send someone? Yi Li shook her head and said, Helion Peng's martial arts are not weak. Even if he is not as good as the prince, he should not be weaker than Ren Qining. Furthermore, he is the general of the northern tribes. Now that he is injured, there should be guards around him. There is no need to send people to their deaths. Let's go to Spirit Vulture Mountain first. Yes, princess. Everyone replied. Some people were left to clean up the battlefield while the rest escorted Yi Li to Spirit Vulture Mountain. The news of Yi Li being blocked by Helion Peng naturally couldn't be hidden from Mo Xiaoyao. Although Yi Li wasn't injured, Mo Xiaoyao's expression was extremely ugly. Even Feng Zhiyao and Han Mingxi, who were usually the most talkative, didn't dare to open their mouths so as to avoid provoking Mo Xiaoyao. Mo Xiaoyao snorted with a gloomy expression. He picked up his incineration sword and left the camp. Seeing this, Feng Zhiyao and the others were stunned. After a long while, Han Mingxi asked somewhat blankly, What is he going to do? Feng Zhiyao blinked his eyes and joked, You're not going to kill Helion Peng, right? Han Mingyue, who was sitting beside Han Mingxi, nodded and said, He is indeed going to kill Helion Peng. Who knows, Yelu Yi and Helion Jin might also be there. Although Feng Zhiyao didn't trust Han Mingyue for a long time, he still had some confidence in his ability and scheming. If it wasn't for Su Zuodi, why would Han Mingyue be like this? Hearing him say this, Feng Zhiyao immediately jumped up and exclaimed, Is he crazy? That is an army of hundreds of thousands. If he alone can slaughter the entire northern tribe's army, then what is the point of fighting? There is a limit to a person's strength. Even if Mo Xiaoyao's martial arts were the best in the world, able to fight against 10, 1 against 100, 1 against 1,000, 1 against 10,000, 1 against 10,000? If he wanted to charge into the army camp and kill Helion Peng and Yelu Yi, Feng Zhiyao only had 2 words for him. You're courting death. After a moment of shock, Feng Jiao finally jumped up and rushed out while shouting, Emo Xiuyao, I owe you in my past life. Man. Gather the men. In the large tent, only Han Mingxi and Han Mingyue, the two brothers, were left. Han Mingxi looked at Han Mingyue and asked in disbelief, Big brother, does Emo Xiuyao really plan to kill Helian Ping? Even if he wanted to kill him, there was no need to charge into the northern tribe's camp. He could find an opportunity to wait until Helian Peng was alone or out of the camp. With Emo Xiuyao's martial arts, he could kill several Helian Pengs. Han Mingyue smiled bitterly and said, How could Prince Ding not think of what you can think of? Han Mingxi didn't understand, then why is he doing this? After today, as long as Emo Xiuyao doesn't die, I'm afraid that no one in this world will dare to have designs on Yi Li. Han Mingyue sighed. He had once thought that Emo Xiuyao was deeply in love with Su Zuidi, and even secretly thought that Emo Xiuyao didn't understand love. Only now did he understand that it wasn't that Emo Xiuyao didn't understand love, it was just that he hadn't met the right person. What Emo Xiuyao did for Yi Li, Han Mingyue admitted that he couldn't do it. Reaching out to pat his somewhat absent-minded brother, Han Mingyue turned and walked out. Inside the tent, Han Mingxi was silent for a long time. Finally, he smiled bitterly and a trace of relief flashed across his face. What Emo Xiuyao could do, he would never be able to do. It wasn't about ability, it was about temperament. He would never be able to do such a thing for a person even if he loved her. This day could be said to be an unforgettable day for all the Northern Tribe soldiers. Of course, that was if they had eternal life. Because the two armies didn't engage in battle these few days, the Northern Tribe's camp had a rare moment of peace. However, it was precisely in this type of calm that the soldiers guarding the entrance to the camp watched as a silver-haired man dressed in snow-white clothes drifted over like a white cloud. Before the soldiers at the door could react to this sudden scene, they only felt a light on their necks. The man in white's cold, scarlet eyes was the last thing they saw in this world. Emo Xiuyao barged into the camp, taking advantage of the fact that the Northern Tribe soldiers had yet to react. He rushed towards the general's tent. His qinggong was extremely high, and along the way the sword qi of the incineration sword scattered, causing countless casualties. Even the unlucky ones who became his stepping stones were shaken to death by the force of his footsteps. Instantly the camp was in chaos. Countless soldiers rushed towards Emo Xiuyao. The soldiers who reacted quickly shot arrows at him, but how could normal arrows hit Emo Xiuyao? Furthermore, it was fine if he was in the air, but once he landed on the ground, it was hard to say if the arrows would hit Emo Xiuyao or their own men. In a moment, the white-robed figure flashed in and out of the camp. Everywhere he went, blood flowed like a river. No one was lucky enough to survive the incineration sword. Every time he swung his sword, blood would flow. With such power, even the Northern Tribe soldiers who were known for their bravery couldn't help but feel terrified. They were afraid that if they were careless, they would die without a doubt. With such a huge commotion in the camp, how could Yelu Yi, who was sitting in the commander's tent, not know? Yelu Yi was furious that Helian Peng had returned with injuries, but when he heard the commotion outside the camp, he couldn't help but be enraged. Just then, the soldiers outside panicked and reported that someone had barged into the camp. Yelu Yi laughed coldly, I would like to see who dares to barge into the Northern Tribe's camp. The moment he brought Helian Zhen and Helian Peng out, he saw Emo Xiuyao, dressed in white and holding a sword, walking over. That dull ancient sword was glowing with a bloody light, its killing intent soaring to the heavens. Emo Xiuyao? Yelu Yi was shocked and angry. He couldn't understand why this fiend would come to the Northern Tribe's camp at this time. Could it be that Emo Xiuyao suddenly felt that as long as he killed him, he would be able to resolve this battle? Chapter 857. Anyone with a little experience would know that a war between countries was not something that could be resolved with the death of one or two commanders. Moreover, how difficult was it to assassinate the commander of an army? Even if Emo Xiuyao killed him, how could Yelu Yi guarantee that he would be able to leave alive? Emo Xiuyao, who was in the midst of killing, also saw Yelu Yi and the other two. With a cold smile, he waved his sword and charged towards Yelu Yi. Looking at the blood-colored sword, Yelu Yi's expression changed. Sword of incineration? Beside him, Helian Zhen's face had already turned black. If Emo Xiuyao managed to escape after charging into the Northern Tribe's camp alone, the Northern Tribes would be in deep trouble. With a cold snort, Helian Zhen brandished the long saber in his hand and charged towards Emo Xiuyao. Yelu Yi had the same idea as Helian Zhen. Seeing Helian Zhen make a move, he also charged forward without hesitation. Since Emo Xiuyao had come here himself, if they could kill him, it would be a good thing for the Northern Tribes. More importantly, if they could kill Emo Xiaoyao, their status in the royal house of the northern tribes could be said to be unshakable. Emo Xiaoyao, you've got guts, you're really arrogant, Yellow Yi said coldly. Seeing the two attacking, Emo Xiaoyao did not reply, only smiling coldly. The sword in his hand cut through the air like a ray of light, emitting a cold sword aura. Helian Peng was already injured, but at this time he stood to the side and watched. When he saw Helian Zhen and Yellow Yi fighting Emo Xiaoyao, he knew that the two of them had no chance of winning. Emo Xiaoyao's martial arts were too weak compared to the two of them. Not to mention competing, the two of them did not even have the qualifications to be mentioned in the same breath as him. Lowering his head to look at the wound on his arm, he thought of the beautiful white-clothed girl who looked like a snow mountain saintess. A trace of coldness flashed through Helian Peng's eyes. He raised his hand to summon the guard beside him and whispered a few words. The guard nodded and turned to leave. Watching Helian Zhen and Yellow Yi struggling under his sword, Emo Xiaoyao revealed a mocking smile. He turned his gaze to Helian Zhen and swung his sword without hesitation. This sword strike did not have the slightest intention of showing any mercy. When Helian Zhen saw the earth-shattering energy, he knew that it was not something he could withstand. But Emo Xiaoyao gave up on Yellow Yi and only targeted him. He had nowhere to hide. He could only use all his strength to raise his saber to block Emo Xiaoyao's sword. With a loud bang, the long saber that was made of fine iron and weighed over 100 kilograms shattered into pieces. The incineration sword in Emo Xiaoyao's hand did not slow down in the slightest as it continued to slash towards Helian Zhen's head. Helian Zhen was a famous general of the northern tribes. 18 years ago he had been defeated by Emo Xiaoyao. 18 years later he had finally regrouped with great difficulty and wanted to make a comeback. But before he could achieve anything, he was about to become a ghost under Emo Xiaoyao's sword. Seeing Helian Zhen's suddenly widened eyes filled with fear and shock, Emo Xiaoyao's eyes flashed with a cold and bloodthirsty smile. Die. Bang, it seemed very slow but in reality, it happened in the blink of an eye. The other saber blocked Emo Xiaoyao's thunderous sword strike. Helian Zhen was also grabbed by Yellow Yi and pulled to the side. Although they avoided death, everyone present was still in a state of shock. They saw Helian Peng holding a large saber that glowed with a faint golden light. But at this time, the saber had already been broken into two halves. Helian Peng's hand holding the saber was trembling uncontrollably. Even the wound on his other arm that was originally bandaged was once again frozen and cracked. It was clear that in order to save Helian Zhen, he had used all his strength to block the attack. The surging internal energy in his body had actually caused his wound to reopen. Emo Xiaoyao lowered his eyes, his expression indifferent as he looked at the incineration sword in his hand. After a while he raised his head to look at Helian Peng and said, "Good martial arts. Murong Xiong's disciple?" If Helian Peng did not say it, Yili would not have been able to see through Helian Peng's background. But Emo Xiaoyao had only exchanged blows with Helian Peng once, and he had clearly seen through his martial arts. He sneered, "It seems that killing Murong Xiong at that time was not an injustice." Helian Peng was clearly not interested in the fact that Emo Xiaoyao was his enemy who had killed his master. He gripped the short saber in his hand and said in a low voice, "Not as good as Prince Ding." What does Prince Ding mean by today's actions? What do I mean? Emo Xiaoyao's smile was somewhat strange as he looked at him and said, "You guys don't know what I mean?" Yellow Yi let go of Helian Zhen's hand and stood beside Helian Peng, saying in a low voice, "Emo Xiaoyao, don't think that just because your martial arts are strong that I am afraid of you. This prince doesn't believe that you alone can do anything to this prince in the midst of an army of 10,000. Emo Xiaoyao sneered and said, "If you don't know then I'll tell you. Anyone who dares to have any ideas about Li will all die." The incineration sword released a dangerous brilliance. Emo Xiaoyao casually waved it, and the flags in the camp not far away fell to the ground. The muscles at the corner of Helian Peng's eyes twitched. He casually wiped off the trace of blood from the corner of his lips and sneered. "I would like to see just how formidable Prince Ding is." With a wave of his hand, countless black-clothed men surged out from every corner of the camp and charged towards Emo Xiaoyao. These people were all personally trained by Helian Peng, and their skills were not too far off from Qilin. The northern tribes people were naturally bloodthirsty. At this time the entire camp was being slaughtered by Emo Xiaoyao, and blood flowed like a river. This aroused the killing intent in their hearts. One by one they charged towards Emo Xiaoyao without hesitation. They were truly unafraid of death. Emo Xiaoyao let out a long whistle, and his white-clothed figure turned into a white ray of light as he shot towards the crowd. Everywhere he went, Blood splattered everywhere and countless broken limbs were left behind. Although Yazi had temporarily trapped Mo Xiaoyao, the expressions of Helian Zhen, Yelu Yi and the others, who were watching the battle from the side, were even more unsightly. Helian Zhen had already lost a lot of blood and just now he had suffered internal injuries from Mo Xiaoyao. His face was pale and his eyes were filled with gloominess. Although Helian Ping didn't cherish these specially trained subordinates as much as Yi Li did, these people were still different from ordinary soldiers. Even Helian Ping only had a little over 1,000 people under his command. Previously, because of Yi Li, he had lost over 100 people. At the very least, he had managed to find out some information about Yi Li. But now, in the blink of an eye, close to 100 people had been killed by Mo Xiaoyao. How could Helian Peng's expression not be ugly? Helian Zhen said with a cold expression, "No matter what, we cannot let Mo Xiaoyao leave this place today." The threat that Mo Xiaoyao gave him was too great. If it was said that Mo Xiaoyao, who was still a teenager 18 years ago, made him feel that his failure was only because he was too careless and unreconciled, then today's meeting completely overturned Helian Zhen's thoughts. The current Mo Xiaoyao was definitely not someone he could deal with. Just now he had only been a hair's breadth away from death. Even 18 years ago he had not felt such a feeling of death. Since he could not defeat Mo Xiaoyao, then he had to kill him by hook or by crook. The northern tribe soldiers who were watching from the side were also shocked by the bloody scene. The current scene was even more impactful than on the battlefield. On the battlefield, everyone was fighting with their lives on the line. No matter how desperate the situation was, no one had the time to care about it. But now they could only watch on helplessly as this could be called a one-sided massacre. Those black-clothed men, who were usually very powerful in the eyes of these ordinary soldiers, were like wooden chickens and pottery dogs in front of this white-clothed, white-haired man, unable to withstand a single blow. The snowy rain fell on Mo Xiaoyao's snow-white clothes, adding a hint of killing intent to his cold and bloodthirsty handsome face. It was as if he was a blood-soaked Azura from hell. Chapter 858. Ah! Kill this devil. Finally, someone couldn't help but break down. Without caring about anything else, he raised his weapon and charged at the blood-stained white figure. Unfortunately, before he could even touch a corner of the other's clothes, he was cut in half by the incoming sword chi. "Archers, shoot!" Yelu Yi ordered in a deep voice. These black-clothed Yazi might be able to trap Mo Xiaoyao, or even exhaust his internal energy to kill him. But that was under the premise that Mo Xiaoyao didn't want to escape. More importantly, even if Mo Xiaoyao didn't escape, who knew how many Yazi would have to die to exhaust Mo Xiaoyao's internal energy? Perhaps it would take 2,000 or 3,000. They didn't have that many people. Once the last black-clothed man died, it would be their turn to test the incineration sword's edge. In an instant, arrows rained down like rain. Although most of the arrows were aimed at Mo Xiaoyao, many of the black-clothed men were too close to Mo Xiaoyao. Moreover, Mo Xiaoyao's figure was erratic. In fact, he was shooting indiscriminately. Mo Xiaoyao sneered. He grabbed a black-clothed man and casually tossed him aside. In an instant he turned into a hedgehog. Turning around he swung his sword. The arrows in the distance seemed to be blocked by something and they all flew back to the person who originally shot them. "Yelu Yi, you're courting death," Mo Xiaoyao said in a deep voice. "Protect the seventh prince." Everyone was shocked. Dozens of people rushed to Yelu Yi's front and back to block Mo Xiaoyao's furious sword strike. Of the dozens of people who blocked the sword, only 3 or 4 remained to protect Yelu Yi. Fortunately, Mo Xiaoyao's attention was quickly drawn back by the arrows coming from behind. Otherwise, Yelu Yi's life would be in danger. Although he managed to keep his life, Yelu Yi's complexion was pale. Looking at Helian Zhen, who had just escaped a calamity like him, he couldn't help but reveal a trace of a bleak and bitter smile. He didn't dare to carelessly issue orders again. Mo Xiaoyao's martial arts, just how high is it? Looking at the white-haired man in white, Yelu Yi couldn't help muttering to himself. Helian Peng clutched his wound and leaned against the entrance of the large tent. Not only did the bleeding wound cause his face to turn pale, it also caused him to feel faint. The current Mo Xiaoyao can probably be considered the #1 expert under the heavens. More than 2 years ago, he had to join forces with Lei Jinting and Ling Taihan to kill my master. If it was now, I'm afraid even if my master was at his peak, he might not be a match for him. Some people were called geniuses. They didn't seem to need to train hard or sharpen their skills. They were born to stand higher than others. Even the heavens couldn't help but be jealous of such a genius. And Mo Xiaoyao was obviously such a person. Just as the entire northern militant camp was trembling in fear from Mo Xiaoyao's massacre, a commotion came from outside the main gate. Two figures, one red and one white, flew in from outside, like two shadows pouncing in the direction of Mo Xiaoyao. Mo Xiaoyao. Feng Jiao's voice was flustered and exasperated. It was fortunate that he had spoken first. Otherwise, he would most likely have suffered two swords like those black-clothed men of the northern militant camp who had been ravaged by Mo Xiaoyao. Mo Xiaoyao kept his sword and glanced unhappily at Feng Jiao and Han Mingyue who had landed in front of him. He said, "Who asked you to be so nosy?" Han Mingyue smiled but didn't say anything. He was only following Feng Jiao to help. He also knew that Mo Xiaoyao wouldn't appreciate his help, so he didn't say anything. Feng Jiao was so angry that his hair stood on end. He grabbed Mo Xiaoyao and said, "Why aren't you leaving? Do you want to die here?" Under normal circumstances, Feng Jiao definitely wouldn't be able to catch Mo Xiaoyao. However, after Mo Xiaoyao's massacre, the anger and brutality in his heart had dissipated. Instead, he felt slightly tired. Even if Mo Xiaoyao was the #1 martial arts expert in the world, the number of northern militant fighters who had died at his hands today was no less than 100. Naturally, it was impossible for him to be completely exhausted. He only wanted to vent his anger on the northern militant and give them a warning. He didn't plan to throw his life away. Even if Feng Jiao and Han Mingyue didn't come, he would have to leave in a while. Now that he was being held back by Feng Jiao, he didn't stay any longer. He glanced disdainfully at Yelu Yi and said, "Let's go." He took the lead and used his qinggong to rush out of the gate. Mo Xiaoyao? Yelu Yi was enraged by that look of disdain. He roared, "Kill him?" Han Mingyue, who was at the end of the group, sighed helplessly. She swung her sword to deflect the arrow that was shot at her, and leaped up to fly outside. Feng Jiao dared to charge into the northern militant camp with Han Mingyue. Naturally, he wouldn't be unprepared. The three of them were still chased by the northern militant army after they left the camp. But after chasing for less than 2 to 3 li, they saw the Mahist army's Black Cloud cavalry waiting for them. Mo Xiaoyao and the other two landed in the midst of the Mahist army and turned to face the northern militant army. The two armies faced each other. Mo Xiaoyao, "One day I will make you die a horrible death." Looking at Mo Xiaoyao, who was sitting on a horse, his white clothes stained with blood, Yelu Yi roared. Mo Xiaoyao snorted and pointed his sword at Yelu Yi. He laughed coldly, "This is what I wanted to say to you. Today I will teach you a lesson. If there is a next time, I will definitely take your dog life. Return to camp." Watching Mo Xiaoyao leisurely leave under the escort of the Mo family troops, Yelu Yi's face turned ashen. "Go back." Yelu Yi and the rest returned to the camp. Mo Xiaoyao's ruckus today had caused the northern militant camp to lose more than 200 ordinary soldiers. Helian Zhen and Helian Peng's specially trained Yazi had more than 400 to 500 casualties. The incineration sword could cut through metal like mud. Not to mention the vital parts, even the sword's aura would cause severe injuries. Those injured soldiers were no different from dead. They would never be able to return to the battlefield again. This was not the worst thing. After all, compared to the millions of soldiers, the loss of a few hundred soldiers was negligible. But the psychological trauma this massacre had on the northern militant soldiers was the most serious thing. With just Prince Ding alone, he was able to move about unhindered amidst the several 100,000 soldiers' campsite, killing until blood flowed like a river. This caused the northern militant soldiers, who were already worried about the reputation of the Mahist army, to be even more fearful of Prince Ding. Seventh Highness. In the tent, Helian Ping knelt on the ground. Due to his heavy injuries, he had not been able to rest properly. This caused his resolute face to look haggard and weak. Yelu Yi stared coldly at him and said, "What do you have to say?" Today's incident was caused by Helian Peng going to deal with Yi Li. Yelu Yi originally did not agree with Helian Peng's actions. It was not that he did not want to deal with Yi Li, but Yi Li was Princess Ding. There would definitely be countless experts protecting her. The chances of success were too low. What's more, the fate of those who had once attacked Yi Li was still there. As expected, Helian Peng's plan had failed. Instead, it attracted Mo Xiaoyao's crazy revenge. This time, what they lost was not the lives of the few hundred soldiers, but the morale of the northern militant army. In such a situation, they would not be able to recover without a few shocking victories. Helian Peng was silent. He lowered his head and said, "I have nothing to say. Please punish me." Chapter 859. Yelu Yi stared at Helian Peng for a long time, then sighed, "Forget it, you're also injured, get up." Let's talk about this after you've recovered. Although Yellow Yi was very unhappy because of Helian Peng, he would not cut off his own arm at this time. He waved his hand to signal Helian Peng to get up. Helian Peng thanked him and stood up. Yellow Yi looked at Helian Zhen sitting on the side and asked, "Uncle, what do you think?" Helian Zhen had been silent since he came back. Seeing Yellow Yi ask him, he sighed and said, "I didn't expect Emo Xiuyao to change so much in just a short 10 years. Your Highness, if Emo Xiuyao is not eliminated, he will become a great threat to the northern tribes." Yellow Yi frowned and said, "Uncle is right. However, there are countless people who want to get rid of Emo Xiuyao, but who has ever succeeded? The Emo Xiuyao today is not the Emo Xiuyao of the past. In the past, the Prince Ding mansion was restrained by the Dechu state's royal family, so they had a chance to deal a fatal blow to the Prince Ding mansion. Unfortunately, the snake did not die, which allowed Emo Xiuyao to grow into the northern tribe's biggest enemy. Now, the Prince Ding mansion was separated from the Dechu state, and Emo Xiuyao had the final say. Moreover, the Prince Ding mansion was of the same mind, so there was no weakness. Helian Zhen looked down and said, "Today, Prince Ding's only weakness is Princess Ding." "Uncle. Absolutely not," Yellow Yi said sternly. Helian Zhen was stunned, looking at Yellow Yi in confusion. Yellow Yi smiled helplessly and said, "Uncle, don't you understand what happened today? In the future, you don't have to think about Yi Li unless Emo Xiuyao is dead. No one can touch Yi Li." Emo Xiuyao's actions today clearly told everyone that if anyone dared to touch Yi Li, he would kill them even if he had to die. Fortunately, today's matter could be considered as a warning. If Emo Xiuyao really decided to kill them today, even if Emo Xiuyao died of exhaustion in the end, the three of them would not be able to escape before he died. People in power always said that they would do whatever it took, but this did not include themselves. Now that they were dead, so what if they killed Emo Xiuyao? So what if they destroyed the Prince Ding mansion? Wasn't it someone else who would benefit from it? Helian Zhen pondered for a while and finally he sighed and said, "I didn't expect that the Prince Ding mansion would have such a romantic." Helian Peng stood up and said to Yellow Yi, "Your Highness, this general requests permission to go to the Spirit Vulture Mountain camp." Yellow Yi frowned and said, "You still want to deal with Yi Li?" Helian Peng said, "I won't make a move against Princess Ding again. However, Princess Ding is currently overseeing the Spirit Vulture Mountain camp, and our army also needs someone to guard it. Princess Ding is resourceful. I'm afraid that the people stationed there are." Yellow Yi thought for a while, then nodded and said, "That's good, you can go after you've recovered. Don't provoke Yi Li again." In the end, Yellow Yi couldn't help but warn him. Helian Peng nodded and said, "I understand, my injuries aren't serious, I can set out tomorrow." "You can go." Yellow Yi waved his hand and said no more. In the Emo family army's camp, young Master Feng San's aura was imposing. His handsome face was filled with anger as he glared at a certain someone who was slowly bandaging her wound. The harsh words that came out of his mouth were so harsh that if an ordinary person heard it, they would be so ashamed that they would slit their own throats and commit suicide in order to escape. But Prince Ding, who had just finished a massacre, was clearly in a very good mood, not taking young Master Feng San's curses seriously at all. He didn't need anyone's help, he just casually grabbed a cloth to bandage the wound on his arm. As for the other small injuries, he simply didn't care. "Feng San, when did you become an old woman? Aren't you tired of nagging?" After bandaging his wound, Emo Xiuyao raised his eyes and glanced at young Master Feng San, indifferently saying. Young Master Feng San couldn't help but choke, his anger rising as he roared, "Emo Xiuyao, you're fucking looking for death, don't drag the entire Prince Ding mansion to die with you. You broke into the Northern Militants camp alone, you, Prince Ding, have the best martial arts in the world, why don't you go kill Yellow Yi, king of the Northern Militant, Enchanting, and Mo Jingli? Once they're all dead, the world will be at peace. Of course, in the end, don't forget to slit your own throat with a sword." At the end, young Master Feng San was so angry that he laughed, revealing a malicious and mocking smile at Emo Xiuyao. "Noisy," Emo Xiuyao said indifferently. Feng Zhiyao was so angry that he picked up the things beside him and threw them at Emo Xiuyao, then slammed the table and left. "Go die if you want, I'm not doing it anymore." Finished speaking, he angrily walked out. Fortunately, there were only the two brothers Han Mingyue and Han Mingxi in this tent. If the Mahist army's generals saw this, Feng Zhiyao wouldn't be able to escape the crime of offending his superior. Emo Xiuyao frowned, then casually caught the things that Feng Zhiyao threw over. "Stop, where are you going?" "I'm going to Spirit Vulture Mountain. If you dare to go finally, I will break your legs." Emo Xiuyao said darkly, "Alright, I know what happened today. It's just to teach Yellow Yi a lesson, I won't come here again." You guys must be tired, go back and rest. Finished speaking, Prince Ding waved his hand, turned around and left the tent, leaving behind the deeply hurt Feng Zhiyao, who sat there in a daze. After a long time he finally reacted, "Mo Xiaoyao, I saved your life and you want to break my legs. What do you mean by sacrificing your life for the opposite sex? That's it. What do you mean by stabbing your brother twice for your wife? Just look at Prince Ding and you'll know." Han Mingyue and Han Mingxi looked at each other, then sympathetically patted Feng Zhiyao's shoulder and walked out. Whatever happened in the Mahist army's camp, under Prince Ding's strict and threatening orders, naturally Yili wouldn't hear about it. Yili took Qin Feng and the others to Spirit Vulture Mountain's camp that night. Because Spirit Vulture Mountain wasn't the main battlefield, and it was supported by Feihong Pass. The Prince Ding mansion didn't have many soldiers, so naturally, they wouldn't deploy too many soldiers here. Only Zhang Qilan's deputy general, Zhou Min, led 50,000 Mahist army and 50,000 Dechu state soldiers to guard here. Yi Li and the others didn't give any advance notice when they arrived, so naturally no one came out to greet them. But the situation outside the army made Yi Li frown. It was already late at night, and the Mahist army, except for the patrolling soldiers, should have already gone to bed. But Yi Li and the others hadn't even gotten close to the camp when they heard the noise coming from inside. This wasn't the noise of something happening in the army, but the sound of soldiers drinking and fooling around. Yi Li's beautiful face suddenly darkened. Zhuo Jing and the others were originally from the Shadow Guard and had never been in the army. Qin Feng was originally from the Black Cloud Cavalry, and the Black Cloud Cavalry's discipline was stricter than the normal Mahist army. They had never seen such a situation and their faces turned ugly. Yun Ting and Qin Yun were both from the army. Yun Ting coughed softly and said in a low voice, "Wang Fei, this shouldn't be the Mahist army soldiers, but the former Dechu state soldiers that we gathered after we recovered the lost land of Dechu state." Yun Ting had been in the Dechu state's army. Although Murong Xin's military discipline was strict, there were always some who disobeyed. He had also heard of many cases where military discipline was loose. These Dechu state soldiers had been utterly defeated by the northern tribes. If the Mahist army hadn't gathered them, they would have been no different from bandits. Yun Ting wasn't surprised that such a situation had occurred. Yi Li quickly understood the crux of the matter. This Lingjiu mountain camp was run by the Mahist army and the Dechu state's army respectively. The Dechu state's remaining soldiers couldn't compare to the Mahist army in terms of battle strength or other aspects. Perhaps some of them had given up. Zhou Min had just made a bet, and it wouldn't be easy for her to control them. Suppressing the anger in her heart, Yi Li said lightly, "Let's go in and take a look." Seeing the group appear at the gate, the guard who had been playing the finger-guessing game finally remembered his duty. He quickly stood up and asked sternly, "Who are you?" Yi Li asked in a low voice, "Where is General Zhou?" When the guard saw that there was a young and beautiful woman in the group, he couldn't help but look down on her. He waved his hand and said, "The military camp is an important place. How can a woman like you ask about it? Why aren't you leaving?" "Impudent." Qin Feng said in a low voice, "Princess Ding is getting married. Why aren't you letting General Zhou come out to receive her?" The guards couldn't help but be stunned. They sized up Yi Li and the others and couldn't help but laugh. "You said she is Princess Ding? A weak little girl dares to pretend to be Princess Ding. How bold. I think you are all spies from the northern tribes?" It had to be said that although Princess Ding's fame was too great, there weren't many people who had seen Yi Li before. And Yi Li's appearance was too deceiving. Under the night sky, she really did look like a weak young lady from a wealthy family. "If she is Princess Ding, then wouldn't I be Prince Ding?" A guard smiled proudly. "Impudent." Qin Feng's expression suddenly changed. Before the guards could see clearly how he moved, the man who spoke just now was grabbed by him and fiercely thrown to the side of the gate. Immediately, a mouthful of blood spurted out. That person raised his head in shock. A bright sword was already at his throat. Qin Feng laughed coldly and said, "You have guts. Do you not want to live anymore?" The others were also shocked by this sudden turn of events. They immediately cried out in alarm. They even forgot about the signal and war drums when the enemy attacked. Yi Li and the others frowned when they saw this. Very quickly the camp became even more lively. Many soldiers rushed over, but all of them looked like they were in a mess. When they saw that the people at the gate were not the enemy soldiers, but a few outstanding-looking men and women, they were all stunned. They didn't know what to do. Until a drunk-looking general walked over, the guards guarding the door then hurriedly came forward to reporting to General, "These people are impersonating Ding Wangfei and want to barge into the camp. Wah what? How dare? The general was about to fly into a rage when a black jade pendant was placed in front of him. Zhuijing said coldly, "Have you seen clearly?" The general's eyes widened. He looked at the black jade pendant in front of him and his legs went soft. Ding. Princess Ding? Yili stepped forward and looked at him indifferently and said, "Who are you? Do you understand? Where is General Zhou?" The general hurriedly said, This general is the Dechu State's Luozhou City commander, Sun Yaowu. Zhouman. General Zhou's camp is still about 10 li away from here. It turned out that ever since Zhou Min and Sun Yaowu were ordered to be stationed here, the Mahist army and the Dechu State's remaining soldiers didn't get along well. These remaining soldiers were beaten up badly by the northern tribes and were almost useless on the battlefield. If it wasn't for the fact that they were worried that they would wander outside and harm the people, they would have already been stripped of their armor and returned to their fields. Zhou Min had just taken charge and didn't have enough prestige. The Mahist army's discipline was strict, but he couldn't control these remaining soldiers of the Dechu state. Helpless, Zhou Min didn't expect them to do anything. He only let them set up camp about 10 li away from the battlefield while he led 50,000 Mahist army soldiers to guard the front against the northern tribes. Because it was close to Feihong Pass and Feihong Pass was guarded by more than 200,000 soldiers of Yuan Pei, it wasn't very difficult. In such a situation even Yi Li was very angry. If it wasn't for Yi Li's insistence on coming to Lingjiu Mountain, perhaps when the two armies fought in the future, this place would be the first place to have a problem. This general didn't know that Wang Fei was coming and didn't receive you. Please forgive me. Wang Fei, please go to the camp and rest for a while. This general will send someone to invite General Zhou over. Sun Yaowu didn't know how to fight, but he was very skilled in flattery. Yi Li was displeased. Just as she was about to refuse to leave and head to Zhou Min's barracks, the sound of a horse's hooves could be heard from afar. In less than a moment, a middle-aged man rode his horse over and stopped at the door. When he arrived in front of Yi Li, he lifted his robe and knelt on one knee. This general, Zhou Min, greets the princess. Chapter 860. Yi Li was not familiar with Zhou Min. She had only seen her a few times in Zhang Qilan's army and had been placed in important positions by Zhang Qilan. Zhang Qilan was an upright and fair person. Since he could promote Zhou Min to lead an army alone, it proved that there was no problem with his ability. Yi Li looked at the man in front of her who had a serious expression and was resolute and silent. She nodded and said, General Zhou, you may dispense with the formalities. Sun Yaowu saw that Zhou Min had come so quickly and his expression was not good. The drunkenness on his face had completely disappeared and a shrewd light appeared in his small eyes. He looked at Zhou Min with a fake smile and said, General Zhou, why have you come so quickly? General's camp is not far from where this general is. Zhou Min did not seem to hear Sun Yaowu's sarcasm and slightly frowned as she reported to Yi Li, Wang Fei, it is already late. Will Wang Fei rest here for the night or go to the Mahist army's camp? Yi Li had a better understanding of the relationship between the two armies. The remaining soldiers of Dechu State were naturally envious of the elites of the Mahist army and disliked them. The elites of the Mahist army naturally looked down on the remaining soldiers of Dechu State that had been beaten to a pulp by the northern tribes. Sun Yaowu naturally disobeyed Zhou Min's orders. Zhou Min also looked down on the remaining soldiers. Aren't you unhappy? He doesn't need you. You can go wherever you want to be. Yi Li thought and said, It's late. We won't disturb the rest of the generals. We'll just stay here for the night. If General Zhou doesn't have anything to do in the camp, you can also stay. Ben Fei has something to say tomorrow morning. Zhou Min hesitated but did not say anything. She nodded and said, Yes, Wang Fei. Seeing Yi Li give such an order, Sun Yaowu's eyes had a trace of pride. Walking in front of Yi Li, he smiled and said, Wang Fei, please. This general did not know that Wang Fei was coming. There are no Yahuan in the camp to serve you. This subordinate will send someone to find 2 people to serve Wang Fei. Yi Li stopped, looked at Sun Yaowu indifferently and asked, It's so late. Where does General Sun plan to find a maid? Sun Yaowu said nonchalantly, There are many villages near Spirit Vulture Mountain. Wouldn't it be easy to find a few girls? It is their good fortune to be able to serve Princess Consort. There's no need. When I'm away from home, this consort doesn't pay much attention. If General Sun has nothing else to do, you should rest early. After speaking, Yi Li ignored Sun Yaowu's expression and walked towards the camp. Sun Yaowu was stunned for a moment before he hurriedly went forward to lead the way for Yi Li. The next morning, when Yi Li stepped into the big tent in the middle of the camp, there were already quite a few people inside. Even the generals of the Mahist army that were 10 li away had arrived. The two sides were seated on different sides. Without looking at the color of their uniforms, it was possible to see who was Zhou Min's subordinate and who was Sun Yao's subordinate. Yi Li asked with a slight frown, "Where is General Sun?" Everyone looked at each other. Finally, a young general stood and said, "Wang Fei, General Sun hasn't woken up yet?" Hearing this, the Mahist army all had disdainful expressions. A straightforward person couldn't help but mock, "It's almost noon and he hasn't woken up yet. General Sun really can sleep. No wonder." The other side also had discontent expressions. Someone couldn't help but complain, "There's no battle, why is he up so early?" Yi Li faintly lowered her eyes. A moment later, she raised her head and said in a deep voice, "Go invite General Sun to rise." 40 strokes of the cane. The big tent instantly became silent. The Mahist army had expressions that this was how it should be. Even Zhou Min's expression softened greatly. He also could not stand Sun Yao's conduct, but his rank was not higher than Sun Yao's. Also, the status of these Dechu state soldiers was special. Even if he could not stand it, he could only turn a blind eye. Wang Fei's actions naturally allowed them to vent their anger. A short while later, Sun Yao was pulled out and pressed outside the tent to be beaten with the cane. What was surprising was that Sun Yao looked like he was bullying the weak and flattering the strong. He did not even make a sound after being beaten with the cane. Yi Li's gaze slowly swept across the faces of Sun Yao's subordinates. She was deep in thought. After the cane was finished, Sun Yao was dragged in. With Lin Han personally supervising this punishment, he naturally wouldn't go easy on Sun Yao. The back of Sun Yao's shirt was a bloody mess. He was placed on the ground and just lay there. This general greets Wang Fei." Yi Li looked down at him and said lightly, "General Sun, do you submit to me beating you with the cane?" Sun Yao stilled and said with a bitter smile, "Wang Fei has given this subordinate the cane. This subordinate naturally does not dare to refuse." Yi Li raised an eyebrow and said with a smile, "You don't dare to refuse? Then you still refuse?" Sun Yao quickly changed his words, I submit wholeheartedly." "Then tell me, why did this Fei hit you?" Yi Li asked. "This?" Sun Yao stilled. He said that he had woken up late, but he felt that it wasn't just for that. Actually, Sun Yao already had an answer in his heart. He just did not dare to say it in front of Yi Li. Yi Li did not look at him and said lightly, "Do you think that this Fei hit you because General Zhou Min and the others have a problem with you? Or, is it because of what happened last night?" Sun Yao's expression changed slightly. It was obvious that Yi Li had hit the nail on the head. Yi Li shook her head and said, "This Fei hit you because you woke up late today?" Sun Yao stilled. He did not believe that the reason was so simple. Naturally, he did not believe that Zhou Min would not make things difficult for him in front of Princess Ding. He heard Yi Li say, "General Zhou. If a general of the Mahist army is late for a meeting, what will happen?" Zhou Min looked down and said with a stern expression, "Reporting to Wang Fei, for someone who is late without a valid reason, he will be beaten 40 times. Yi Li looked at Sun Yao with a smile and asked, "General Sun, does waking up late count as a valid reason?" Sun Yao said somewhat embarrassedly, "This general knows his mistake. This general accepts wholeheartedly." Yi Li nodded and ordered, "Help General Sun up." Zhuojing and Qin Feng helped Sun Yao up on his left and right. They did not allow him to refuse and helped him to a chair at the side to sit down. Sun Yao had just been beaten 40 times and was in so much pain that he broke out in a cold sweat. As soon as he touched the chair, he reflexively wanted to stand up, but Qin Feng casually pushed him back down. Knowing that Princess Ding wanted to sort him out now, Sun Yao could only bitterly sit down. Looking at Sun Yao with a smile that was not a smile, Yi Li looked at everyone and said lightly, "From today onwards, this Fei will be overseeing the Lingjiu mountain camp. General Zhou and General Sun will still be in charge of military affairs. This Fei will pretend that everything that happened before did not happen, but if something that should not happen happens again?" Lin Han, the Mahist army's military rules. Lin Han swept a glance over Sun Yao's group and said expressionlessly, "Gathering a crowd to cause trouble, you will be beaten 100 times. During wartime, you will be beaten 50 times for drinking alcohol, 30 times for not working and resting on time. Dereliction of duty, you will be beaten 100 times. Delaying military plans, you will be beheaded. Disobeying military orders, you will be beheaded." Chapter 861. After Lin Han finished reading, Yili said, "Starting from today, these are your military rules. Ben Fei will not punish normal soldiers. If there is a violation, Ben Fei will punish you for not being strict enough." After saying this, Yili sent everyone out. Walking at the very back, Sun Yaowu hesitated. He wanted to speak but stopped. Yili seemed to have known this would happen. She looked at him with a smile and said, "General Sun, do you have something to say?" Sun Yaowu thought for a moment and said, "Wang Fei's meaning just now, does it mean, in the future we will be the same as the Mahist army?" Yili raised an eyebrow and asked, "Did General Zhou embezzle your pay?" Sun Yaowu had a bitter expression and remained silent. The Mahist army did not treat them unfairly. Even though they had basically just sat in the barracks and had nothing to do in the past few months, fighting and defending had all been taken by the Mahist army. Zhou Min had not embezzled a single cent of their pay, taking the same amount of money and food as the other, but one was ready to fight at any moment, and the other was just sitting in the barracks catching lice. Anyone with a bit of shame would feel embarrassed. The Mahist army looks down on us defeated generals. After a long time, Sun Yaowu managed to squeeze out a sentence. Hearing this, Yili chuckled. After a long time, she looked at Sun Yaowu and said, "General Sun, based on what Ben Fei saw last night, even beheading you would be a light punishment. Do you know why Ben Fei is not punishing you? You don't think that Ben Fei is soft-hearted and cannot kill you, do you?" I don't dare," Sun Yaowu said embarrassedly. Based on the fact that he had been forced to sit here for almost an hour without being able to move, he knew that this Wang Fei had many tricks up her sleeve. It really had nothing to do with being soft-hearted. Yili smiled at him and said with a faint smile, "It's good that you don't dare." Sun Yaowu shrunk his neck back and did not dare to make a sound. He finally understood that this famous Princess Ding was not to be trifled with and was not easy to fool. It was no wonder that those arrogant generals of the Mahist army were convinced by her. Thinking to this point, Sun Yaowu no longer had his cowardly and crafty appearance. He raised his head and said to Yili, "Wang Fei, as long as the Mahist army sincerely accepts us, we will naturally wholeheartedly serve the Prince Ding mansion." Sun Yaowu looked uneasily at Ding Wang Fei, who was seated with a calm expression. He wasn't sure if his gamble was right or wrong. After a long time, he heard Yili say indifferently, "General Sun, do you know why this consort didn't directly punish you for your crimes after seeing the situation in the barracks last night?" Sun Yaowu stared blankly for a moment, but he didn't dare to play any tricks. He honestly said, "This general doesn't know. Princess, please tell me." Yili said, "That is because you did your duty. On the way here, the people near your barracks were quite peaceful. It can be seen that even though you indulged your subordinates, you still had a sense of propriety. Even more so, even though you reeked of alcohol when you came out to greet this consort. But that wine was poured at the time and you weren't really drunk. Marquis Nan had mentioned you to this consort, but this consort was disappointed when I saw you." Sun Yaowu lowered his head and smiled bitterly, "So Marquis Nan is still alive. I'm just a defeated general, I don't dare to trouble Marquis Nan." It turned out that when Sun Yaowu was young, he had once served under Marquis Nan. Even though it wasn't long and he was only a small captain, Marquis Nan had an impression of him. Clearly he wasn't a useless person. Yili looked at him and said, "This consort understands your meaning. However, this consort also wants you to understand that the Mahist army will never look down on the strong. If you lose, you can fight again. Last time you lost, next time you win, no one will look down on you. As the saying goes, victory and defeat are common in war. But now, they do have a reason to look down on you." Sun Yaowu muttered unwillingly, "General Zhou only arranged for us to clean up the battlefield. How would we have the chance to fight back?" Yili laughed lightly, "From now on, you and General Zhou will each lead an army and guard a pass. Like this, if you lose again." Sun Yaowu's eyes lit up and he said loudly, "If I lose again, this general is willing to take off his armor and return to the fields. This general's soldiers will be at Wang Fei's disposal." Yili smiled with satisfaction. "Very good, it's a deal. It's a deal. This general will take his leave." Waving his hand to let Sun Yaowu leave, Zhuojing said worriedly, "Wang Fei, is Sun Yaowu okay?" It wasn't that Zhuojing looked down on people, but the situation yesterday was too terrible. Even the army's appearance was disorderly. The soldiers were lazy and had no fighting spirit. Handing over a large camp to him really made people feel uneasy. Yili smiled and said, "This person is interesting. Look at the battles he fought. There's a saying that is correct, the fault of not fighting. It's not that he's useless, it's that he was unable to turn the tide in the situation. Also, To be able to gather tens of thousands of injured soldiers and control them from harming the common people, this person has some ability. Yi Li pointed at the report under her hand and pushed it over to Zhuo Jing. Qin Feng didn't understand, then what was he doing before? If the one who came wasn't the good-tempered Wang Fei, but someone like Lu Jingxian or Zhang Qilan, Sun Yaowu would probably be pushed out and beheaded immediately. Yi Li smiled and said, "It's probably because they feel that Zhou Min looks down on them. This is another way of protesting. As for whether he can do it or not, it'll depend on his performance later. If he really is good, then he can be considered a valiant general in the Mahist army. If he can't do it, then it won't be too late to deal with him." Zhuo Jing put down the report and smiled. "It's really interesting. This Sun Yaowu almost took back Luozhou City a few times. Unfortunately, he didn't have enough troops and had no reserves, so he could only be chased by the northern tribe's army. Even so, he was still able to gather 50 to 60,000 soldiers along the way." Qin Feng raised his eyebrows and smiled. "It seems that he does have some ability. Wang Fei's eyes are very good." Yi Li smiled faintly. "I hope he won't disappoint me." Sun Yaowu's ability was not bad. Although the overall fighting strength of his soldiers was not on the same level as Zhou Min's Mahist army. But the few times they fought with the northern tribes, they won more than they lost. The Chu State's soldiers were not as weak as others thought. By the time Hisu arrived with over 200,000 soldiers, the Mahist army had gradually accepted Sun Yaowu and his defeated soldiers. With Hisu's 200,000 soldiers, the front line at Lingjiu Mountain was impregnable. After Yi Li discussed with the generals, she adjusted the defensive line. The 300,000 soldiers were divided into 3 camps and formed a crescent shape to guard the area outside Feihong Pass. She also transferred 50,000 men from Hisu's army to Sun Yaowu, who was the weakest. Sun Yaowu was instantly filled with gratitude and was completely convinced by this Ding Wang Fei. Helian Peng had not even recovered from his injuries when he brought his men to the northern tribe's camp not far from Lingjiu Mountain. A few days after he arrived, he saw that his injuries were more or less healed and brought his men to challenge the Mahist army camp. The Mahist army around Lingjiu Mountain was divided into 3 camps and relied on each other. Helian Peng naturally did not know which camp Yi Li was in and only brought his men to challenge the camp closest to the northern tribe's camp. This was where Sun Yaowu's assistant was. Sun Yaowu was full of energy and would not let Helian Peng humiliate him. He immediately gathered his men and went out to meet the enemy. It didn't matter what kind of formation it was as long as it could injure people. It was fine as long as it could injure them. The soldiers of the Dechu state and the Mahist army were used to being serious. The sudden appearance of Sun Yaowu caught the northern tribes off guard. The battle ended in less than 2 hours. Helian Peng's face darkened as he gave the order to retreat. Although they hadn't lost, they had suffered an unknown loss. Sun Yaowu didn't chase after him and cheerfully sent people to clean up the battlefield and carry the dead northern tribe's horses back to add to the dishes. "General Sun really makes me see you in a new light." Yi Li smiled as she looked at the proud Sun Yaowu. Sun Yaowu hurriedly said, "This general is rude and has embarrassed himself in front of Princess." Yi Li shook her head and said, "General doesn't have to be so polite. Today's battle has really opened my eyes." Seeing that Yi Li didn't seem to be joking, Sun Yaowu could only laugh dryly and didn't know what to say. Yi Li knew that this was his nature and didn't mind. The Prince Ding mansion in the north had just pacified the north and was in full battle with the northern tribes. Naturally, they had no time to care about the south. The people in the south weren't idle either. Ever since Mo Jingli brought Dongfang Yu back to Jiangnan, Dongfang Hui also brought the power of the infinite boundless mountain to secretly infiltrate the Dechu state's court. Although Dongfang Hui didn't appear in the court, the entire Dechu state's court was vaguely under the control of the infinite boundless mountain. The only one who could slightly contend against them was the Empress Dowager in the harem. The Empress Dowager had reached an agreement with Mo Xiuyao to protect her life and her reputation. Naturally, there was a price to pay for this. Moreover, the infinite boundless mountain controlled the power of the Dechu state. This would only be more disadvantageous to the Empress Dowager, who was gradually losing her power. The Empress Dowager was naturally willing to cooperate with the Prince Ding mansion. As a result, the Empress Dowager and Mo Jingli completely fell out in the court. After Mo Jingli had the support of the infinite boundless mountain, he was naturally anxious to ascend the throne. He was extremely displeased with the little nephew who occupied his throne. However, the Empress Dowager and some of the old officials in the court swore to protect the little emperor. As a result, the people on both sides fought openly and secretly. The Dechu state's court was turbulent inside and outside. Dongfang Hui secretly controlled the Dechu state's court and gradually found some interesting things. Although the infinite boundless mountain's position was high, how could the secluded cultivation be compared to the power and influence of the Empress Dowager? As a result, Dongfang Hui put more energy into suppressing the Empress Dowager's party. When she came back to her senses and found that something was wrong, the Shilling army had already surrounded the infinite boundless mountain. For Mo Jingli, the infinite boundless mountain was just a mountain. If there was no more, they could just change to another place. However, for Dongfang Hui, the significance of the infinite boundless mountain was no less important than the Chu capital to the Dechu state. Mo Jingli could lose the Dechu state, but she, Dongfang Hui, could not let the Shilling army destroy the infinite boundless mountain. She could not afford to lose that person. Helplessly, Dongfang Hui could only leave all the affairs in Jiangnan to Dongfang Yu and hurried back to the infinite boundless mountain with people. However, Dongfang Hui did not know that with Dongfang Yu's temper, leaving such an important matter to her would cause big trouble. More importantly, she could not return to the Dechu state this time. Although Dongfang Hui received the news very quickly, the Shilling army and Su Qingchen were obviously faster. The natural protective formation outside the infinite boundless mountain could not stop young Master Qingchen for too long. When Dongfang Hui arrived at the infinite boundless mountain, the Shilling army had already occupied the entire main peak of the infinite boundless mountain. Having obtained many secrets of the infinite boundless mountain, the West Hill and the Prince Ding mansion naturally began to mercilessly clean up the spies and properties that the infinite boundless mountain had placed in various places over the years. For a time, except for Jiangnan and a few extremely secretive forces, all of them were cleaned up. For a time, the vitality of the infinite boundless mountain was greatly damaged. Even if it was not destroyed, it would not be able to recover without 50 to 60 years. Dongfang Hui hated Lei Jinting and Su Qingchen to the core, but she could do nothing. She could only return to Jiangnan with the remaining subordinates. However, before she could cross the Cloud Billow River, she was stopped by Lei Tingfeng and Su Qingchen. Prince Genom of Gojoseon, young Master Qingchen, you are indeed capable. Dongfang Hui, who was already at the end of her rope, looked at the two juniors in front of her with a complicated expression. She had never thought that one day the infinite boundless mountain would be so easily destroyed because of her injuries. Even more so, she had never thought that she would be forced into such a state by two juniors. Young Master Qingchen was gentle and elegant, smiling mildly without speaking. Lei Tingfeng smiled and said, Madame Dongfang, you flatter us. Speaking of this, for us to be able to await Madame's grand arrival here, we still have to thank you for being of infinite boundless mountain. If not for this, even if the majority of the infinite boundless mountain's forces were destroyed, we juniors would not be able to find where you wanted to go. Chapter 863. Dongfang Hui's heart jolted, her eyes flashing. Infinite boundless mountain's own people. Who is it? Lei Tingfeng smiled. Why ask when you already know the answer, madam? How many people under the heavens can know madame's thoughts? Dongfang Hui's face paled as she shook her head. It's her. No, impossible. Why would she do that? Seeing Dongfang Hui's expression, Lei Tingfeng couldn't help but feel a trace of joy in his heart. Although his father didn't want infinite boundless mountain's help, Lei Tingfeng still felt a little uncomfortable that infinite boundless mountain had chosen Mo Jingli over him back then. Now that he saw Dongfang Hui's misfortune, he naturally felt some joy in his heart. Why would she do that? Naturally, I'll have to ask Madame. After all, she's Madame's beloved disciple. Dongfang Hui wasn't an impulsive and stupid person, and very quickly understood her current situation. Ignoring Lei Tingfeng's gloating, she looked at him calmly. Prince Genom of Gojoseon, how do you want to deal with me? Lei Tingfeng was a little hesitant. Lei Jinting's intention was to directly kill Dongfang Hui. With Dongfang Hui's personality, once she recovered, what awaited them would be her vicious revenge. Infinite boundless mountain had existed for hundreds of years, and was involved in many countries' politics. Although most of her power had already been destroyed, no one knew if she still had any secret forces in the dark. Most of the time, a single fatal blow was already enough. However, Lei Tingfeng couldn't help but think of something else. He needed someone to support him. These years he had tried his best, but his results were mediocre. Even Mo Jingli, whom he had always looked down on, was much more famous than him. He knew that he needed to completely familiarize himself with his own forces and subordinates. And Dongfang Hui's performance in Dechu State a few days ago was enough to prove that she was definitely a capable woman. With just a glance, Dong Fenghui knew that Lei Tingfeng was wavering. A dark light flashed in her eyes as Dong Fenghui said in a low voice, "Since things have come to this, Dong Fenghui will admit defeat. Dong Fenghui and Infinite Boundless Mountain will be at your disposal." As expected, Lei Tingfeng's heart moved as he smiled mildly. "Madam is indeed a heroine, able to let things go." Prince Rui. Su Qingchen, who was standing beside Lei Tingfeng, suddenly spoke with a smile. As soon as Su Qingchen opened her mouth, Dong Fenghui knew that she was in trouble. She secretly regretted that she had been too anxious to show goodwill to Lei Tingfeng, that she had forgotten that Su Qingchen was still in front of her. Before Su Qingchen could speak, Dong Fenghui said indifferently, "Since when did young Master Qingchen start to care about the affairs of the Jinan mansion?" While Lei Tingfeng was somewhat moved by Dong Fenghui and the remnant powers of Infinite Boundless Mountain, he had not yet reached the point where he lost his head over them. Moreover, he had always admired and feared Su Qingchen, so he naturally couldn't embarrass Su Qingchen. Qingchen, 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 Qingchen's Qingchen. Su Qingchen looked at Dong Fenghui, saying softly, "I just want to say, Prince, be careful. If you don't kill the snake, it will hurt you." Lei Tingfeng's heart shook and his mind became clear. Thinking of his royal father's fearful attitude towards Infinite Boundless Mountain, if even his royal father did not have the confidence to control Infinite Boundless Mountain, even willing to cooperate with King Ding's manor to destroy it, on what basis did he think that he would be able to control it? Not only would he not be of help to him, he would be inviting a wolf into the house. Thinking of this, Lei Tingfeng couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. Father said that he still lacked experience, and it was indeed true. "Thank you for your reminder." Lei Tingfeng thanked him in a low voice. Hearing Lei Tingfeng's words, Dong Fenghui knew that the situation was hopeless. Her face ashen, she glared hatefully at Su Qingchen. "Su Qingchen, what enmity do I have with you that you want to harm me like this?" Because of Su Qingchen, Dong Fenghui had to mess up her plan and marry Mo Jingli. Dong Fenghui didn't believe that Su Qingchen had nothing to do with it. Afterwards, Su Qingchen had personally gone south, assisting the Shilling army in breaking Infinite Boundless Mountain's mountain-protecting Grand Formation, causing Infinite Boundless Mountain to cease to exist. Now, Su Qingchen's casual words had cut off her chance of survival. It could be said that Infinite Boundless Mountain had been defeated by Su Qingchen alone. Dong Fenghui really wanted to ask, what enmity did Infinite Boundless Mountain have with Su Qingchen in her previous life? Su Qingchen smiled mildly, "You worry too much, madam. It's just that our standpoints are different." Dong Fenghui was a threat to the Prince Ding mansion. If they could get rid of her, why would they leave her behind? Such an understatement made Dong Fenghui so angry that her eyes turned red. Staring at Su Qingchen, Dong Fenghui's lips moved, about to say something when with a whoosh, a silver light shot through the air. Dong Fenghui's chest instantly blossomed with a beautiful flower of blood. Dong Fenghui lowered her head, staring fixedly at the arrow that had pierced through her chest. Under the sunlight, the silver arrow was still stained with Dong Fenghui's blood, emitting a cold light. What? Dong Fenghui lowered her head, her eyes filled with pain, unwillingness and loss. Su Qingchen's voice sounded mildly, "Even if I didn't stop you, madam should know that you would definitely not be able to leave this place. This way of dying, to madam, is actually more painful than dying at the hands of the Shilling army?" Dong Fenghui's lips twitched as if she wanted to squeeze out a smile. Unfortunately, she no longer had any strength left, and the color in her eyes gradually faded, finally becoming dull and lifeless. Lei Tingfeng and Su Qingchen stood side by side, looking at the woman lying in a pool of blood. After a long time he sighed, "Young Master Qingchen's mercy really makes one unable to enjoy it. There's a saying that is really true. A woman's heart is the most poisonous." Su Qingchen smiled mildly, raising his head, "Since the matter of Infinite Boundless Mountain is settled, I will be returning to Glass City. Duke Rui, please bid farewell to Genom of Gojoseon on my behalf." Lei Tingfeng was shocked. "Young master, is leaving just like that?" Su Qingchen smiled, "With mundane matters bothering me, I indeed have no time to linger." Lei Tingfeng struggled a little in his heart, whether or not to detain Su Qingchen. But seeing the bright smile of the man in front of him, and the imposing aura of the guard standing behind him, he decided to give up. Lei Tingfeng still decisively gave up on this idea, smiling as he cupped his hands, "If that's the case, I won't see you off." Su Qingchen smiled, "Duke Rui, you don't have to be so courteous. Farewell." Jiangnan in the regent's manor. In a somewhat cold and dark room, Dong Fengyu sat alone, lost in thought. If someone was beside her at this moment, they would definitely be able to see that her beautiful eyes, which seemed to be filled with emotion, were now completely red, evidently having just gone through a painful experience. Her beautiful face was filled with haggard and worry, as well as a trace of ruthlessness and decisiveness. Knock knock. A series of soft knocks sounded from outside. Dong Fangyu, however, seemed to be shocked, abruptly standing up, staring at the door. Who is it? Madam. An anxious voice sounded from outside. Dong Fangyu was shocked, quickly rushing to the door and opening it. What happened to Madam? The woman at the door said with tears in her eyes. Madam was killed by Lei Tingfeng and Su Qingchen by the Cloud Water River. An infinite boundless mountain. Infinite boundless mountain is also finished. Chapter 864. Master. Dong Fangyu murmured softly as if she was about to collapse. The girl beside her hurriedly supported her, saying worriedly, Madam has passed away, and the elders have also been killed by Lei Tingfeng. Infinite boundless mountain can only rely on Miss now. Miss, you have to pull yourself together. Dong Fangyu waved her hands, saying somewhat helplessly, I know, you can leave first. I want to be alone for a while. Tell them to come see me tomorrow. The girl looked worriedly at Dong Fangyu, but still sighed and left sadly. With Madam and the elders suddenly killed, the heavy responsibility of infinite boundless mountain could only fall on Mississippi. But thinking of Mrs. Personality, after dismissing the girl who came to report, Dong Fangyu slowly closed the door. The room returned to its previous darkness, and Dong Fangyu threw herself on the bed, crying softly. She was adopted by Dong Fanghui, and her master had raised her from a young age, teaching her how to read and write, teaching her martial arts, teaching her strategy. But now, Master, don't blame you or? I hate Mo Jingli, why did you force me? You love you or the most, don't blame me? When Dong Fangyu received the news of Dong Fanghui's death, Mo Jingli naturally received the news as well. In contrast to Dong Fangyu's grief, Mo Jingli was full of joy. Although it had only been a few months, Mo Jingli had long since grown tired of Dong Fanghui's control and command of him. This was completely different from what he had originally imagined. If Dong Fanghui still didn't die, he would probably become a puppet one day. But it was completely different if it was Dong Fangyu. Dong Fangyu was extremely intelligent, but she was much easier to deal with than Dong Fanghui. And Mo Jingli could feel Dong Fanghui's increasing desire for power, while Dong Fangyu herself did not have much interest in power. Mo Jingli believed that in time he could definitely borrow Dong Fangyu's hand to control the power of infinite boundless mountain. Although most of them had been wiped out by Genom of Gojoseon, the remaining portion was still considerable. At least within Jiangnan, Mo Jingli had absolute control over everything. When Mo Jingli hurried to Dong Fangyu's room, he heard sobs coming from inside. He couldn't help but frown. He pushed the door open and entered. Princess, Dong Fangyu suddenly sat up and glanced at Mo Jingli like a knife. He said unhappily, What are you doing here? Mo Jingli ignored her anger and walked into the room. He raised his eyebrows and smiled. Why are you crying? Are you crying for your master? Dong Fangyu wiped his tears and stared at him coldly. What do you want to say? Or do you think that I will be afraid of you just because master is dead? Looking at her, Mo Jingli said, Not only is your master dead, your infinite boundless mountain is finished as well. Dong Fangyu, do you think I still need to be polite to you? Dong Fangyu laughed coldly. How can the power of my infinite boundless mountain be finished so easily? Even the power of the West Hill and the Prince Ding mansion is finished. Mo Jingli, believe it or not, I will crush you to death right now. Mo Jingli's eyes flashed and he stared at Dong Fangyu vigilantly. He knew that Dong Fangyu was not joking. The biggest difference between this woman and her master was that she did not know how to weigh the pros and cons. This kind of woman was even more dangerous. If he angered her, she could really kill him. Although Mo Jingli lost face because he couldn't beat a woman, Mo Jingli still had to admit that Dong Fangyu's martial arts were not bad. It could be said that she was the woman with the highest martial arts that he had ever seen. She was even more powerful than Yi Li and Leng Luiwei of the Yanwang Chamber of Commerce. His eyes darkening, Mo Jingli smiled calmly. You don't have to be like this. I don't mean to embarrass you. Dong Fangyu snorted coldly. Obviously she did not care. Mo Jingli looked at her and whispered, I know what you are thinking. We can cooperate. Dong Fangyu was stunned and looked at him suspiciously. Mo Jingli said without changing his expression, You still can't forget Su Qingchen, right? It doesn't matter. As long as you cooperate with me, I can help you get him. Dong Fangyu said disdainfully. Mo Jingli's eyes flashed with a trace of displeasure when he was looked down upon by her, but he was not angry. Since I dare to say so, I naturally have the confidence and ability. It just depends on whether you want it or not. Maybe. Young Master Qingshan is not so important in your heart? Then you should obediently stay in the Prince Regent's mansion as a princess consort. This prince will not treat you unfairly. However, young Master Qingshan has already passed the age limit. No matter what, he will be getting married in 2 years. At that time, there will be a beautiful woman by his side. Shut up. Dong Fangyu said angrily. Mo Jingli raised his eyebrows and looked at her. After a long time, Dong Fangyu said in a low voice, I will cooperate with you. Outside the door, a white figure quietly left. In the courtyard of the Prince Regent's Rong Fei, Ying indifferently handed a letter to the delicate girl beside her. Have someone give this letter to Madame Yaoji of the Marquis Muyang's mansion. Not long after, a gray figure came out and went out of the mansion. Chapter 865. In the northern camp at Lingjiao Mountain, Yili sat calmly in her tent and browsed through the battle reports and memorials sent in from various places. A few days ago, Helian Peng had suffered a few small losses at their hands and did not come to challenge them again. The two armies were at peace, but Mo Xiuyao's side had fought 2 battles and completely suppressed the northern tribe's army's arrogance. This caused the soldiers under Yi Li and Lu Jingxian to become restless. Lu Jingxian's side was still fine, but Yi Li's side still had to guard against Lei Jinting's troops at the rear and could not act rashly. This caused the eyes of the soldiers to turn red as they listened to the reports sent in every day. Princess, General Zhou, General Sun, General He and the others request an audience. Qin Feng came in and reported with a smile. Yi Li put down the battle reports in her hands and smiled. They're here to ask for battle again? Qin Feng nodded and smiled. These days we've been guarding and not coming out. They must be bored. Yi Li thought and said, let them in. This subordinate obeys. Hearing Yi Li's words, even Qin Feng's eyes lit up. Even though he could not personally charge onto the battlefield, he could still drink some soup when others ate meat. The generals were not the only ones who were suffocated. After a while, He Su, Zhou Min and the others filed in and bowed to Yi Li. Greetings to Princess. Yi Li smiled and said, there's no need to be so courteous. Generals, why are you here instead of staying in your respective camps? Sun Yaowu was the first to speak, reporting to the princess, this subordinate requests for battle. Yi Li raised an eyebrow and looked at him with a smile but did not speak. Sun Yaowu was in awe of this young Princess Yi Li. Being looked at like this, he felt embarrassed and said uneasily, Princess, we've been guarding here and watching others fight. It's really frustrating. Wouldn't that affect the morale of the soldiers? Yi Li nodded and said, that makes sense. What do you think? Hearing this, the eyes of all the generals present lit up. Sun Yaowu smiled and said, this subordinate is willing to be the vanguard and take down Luo State City while they are unprepared. He Su and Zhou Min had known him for some time, and they knew that the loss of Luo State City was a sore point in his heart, so they didn't try to snatch the credit from him. He Su said in a low voice, this subordinate is willing to hold the line for General Sunday. Zhou Min also smiled. This subordinate is willing to guard Spirit Vulture Mountain. Spirit Vulture Mountain definitely needed someone to guard it. Zhou Min was not in a hurry. As long as the battle started, would there be a lack of battles to fight? You guys are of one mind. The 3 of them looked at each other and smiled. Then they all looked at Yi Li. Yi Li tapped her index finger on the table a few times. She pondered for a moment and said, send me your plan first. The 3 of them were overjoyed and said in unison, this subordinate obeys. This subordinate will take his leave. After saying that, they rushed out the door to gather the troops without waiting for Yi Li's signal. Yi Li and the other 2's figures disappeared from the door of the tent. She couldn't help but shake her head with a smile. Then she instructed Qin Feng behind her, let Qi Lin prepare. Since we are going to take down Luo State City, there cannot be any mistakes. That Helian Peng is also not easy to deal with. Qin Feng replied, this subordinate obeys. Luo State City was not very eye-catching in the entire Dechu State. It was not a stronghold located at the border, nor was it a famous city in Dechu State. However, it had a rather troublesome aspect. Normal cities were easy to defend and hard to attack, but Luo State City was easy to attack and hard to defend. Because it was quite far from the border, although the northern tribes had repeatedly invaded the border, they had never truly broken through the border. As a result, although the cities near the border were built to be impregnable, this unremarkable Luozhou city was barely able to build a city wall. It was as good as not having a city wall. The northern tribe's army could even break through the border cities, so a mere Luo state city was naturally nothing to them. Hence, when Luo state fell, Sun Yawu could not be blamed for not being able to defend the city. Even if Sun Yawu was the reincarnation of Sun Wu, and Bai Qi was reborn, they would only be defeated. When the Mahist army deployed their troops, although Luo State City was very close to Spirit Vulture Mountain, the Mahist army did not have enough troops. Furthermore, Luo State City was easy to attack and hard to defend. Taking it down was not difficult, but defending it was extremely difficult. In the end, they could only be caught in a tug-of-war with the Northern Tribe's army. Hence, the Mahist army did not bother about him. The reason why Yi Li agreed to Sun Yao's request was because Mo Xiaoyao had already pushed the Northern Tribe's army back. They naturally had to cooperate to chase Helian Peng's army out. As for how they would defend Luo State City after taking it down, the Mahist army was not the same as the Dechu State army. Even if Helian Peng wanted to snatch it from them, he would have to see if it was worth it. Luo State City was not a good place to station troops. Helian Peng's army was naturally not stationed in Luo State City, but only a portion of them. Under the night sky, the entire city was silent, with only the occasional flicker of light. In these 2 years, the people in the north had either died or fled. Could be said that less than 10% of them were still alive. Although it was not too late, Luo State City was already immersed in darkness. Under the cover of the night, a group of men in black neatly climbed up the non-existent city wall and quickly disappeared into the night. In a secluded place not far from Luo State City, Sun Yawu was pacing back and forth anxiously under the night sky of the city. Qin Feng, who was standing beside him, leaned lazily against a tree and smiled. "General Sun, what are you doing?" Sun Yawu frowned. "If we hide here, what if they alert the guards of Luo State City and attract the reinforcements of the northern tribes? Wouldn't all our efforts be for naught?" Qin Feng smiled. "General Sun, don't worry. If it was Glass City, Chu Capital, or Enchanting, we might have to be more careful. In a place like Luo State City, if they could alert the guards, they would not be able to survive." Although Sun Yawu had long heard of Qi Lin's reputation, he had never seen it for himself. He asked suspiciously, "Commander Qin, are you that confident?" Qin Feng raised his eyebrows and said with a smile, "Of course. If my subordinates can't even have confidence in them, who can trust them? General Sun, don't you also believe in your subordinates?" Sun Yawu smiled. "That's true. I would also like to see how powerful the Qi Lin of the Mahist army is." Qin Feng smiled. "General Sun, just wait and see." In less than half an hour, Luo State City was filled with green signal fireworks. Sun Yawu was stunned. "That's it?" Qin Feng smiled. "General Sun, please." When Sun Yawu arrived at Luo State City with his troops, he saw that the city gates were open and the city was in a state of chaos. However, there were only a few northern tribe soldiers who could mount the city walls to defend against their attack. In less than an hour, they had already taken down Luo State City. When Sun Yawu stood on the city walls again, he was still in a daze. If Luo State City could be taken down so easily, what was he thinking about for the past 2 years? Chapter 866. Looking at his complicated expression that seemed to be both happy and sad, Qin Feng said with a smile, "General Sun, do not take it to heart. Wang Fei said before that Luozhou is easy to attack but hard to defend. From a military perspective, there is no value in its existence. No matter who it is easy to break through. Therefore, the loss of Luozhou was not General's fault." Sun Yawu leaned against the city wall. Hearing Qin Feng's words, he suddenly couldn't help but cry. In reality, how could he not know that the loss of Luozhou was fated? But as a general, because of his loss, countless people of Luozhou had died. Sun Yawu did not know what other people thought, but he could not pass the barrier in his heart. If he had not encountered the Mahist army and Princess Ding, Sun Yawu would have either died of depression and regret for the rest of his life, or become a bandit. It was also because of this that Sun Yawu respected and trusted Yi Li. Not only because Yi Li had given him trust, but also because Yi Li had given him new hope in life. Qin Feng looked calmly at Sun Yawu and did not try to persuade him. Wang Fei was right. While Sun Yawu did not care about small matters, he was a rare general with a conscience. After waiting for Sun Yawu to vent his accumulated emotions, Qin Feng went forward to pat his shoulder and said with a smile, "All right, get up if you've cried enough. The war has only just begun." Sun Yawu was a little embarrassed to see a big man crying in front of others. Roughly wiping away his tears, Sun Yaowu forced himself to ignore Qin Feng's half-smile and said, I, old son, usually think that I am very daring, but isn't Wang Fei's plan too risky? If Helian Peng does not fall for it and does not come to save Luo Zhou, then Wang Fei will be in trouble. Qin Feng rubbed his chin and thought, Wang Fei said that Helian Peng will definitely come. What? Her Highness said that this place has no strategic significance at all, Sun Yaowu said. Qin Feng smiled and said, even if that's the case, by standing in Luo State City, it's the same as stabbing a nail into Helian Peng's back. Moreover, the princess consort said that he couldn't afford to lose face like this. Therefore he will definitely come. From the very beginning, Helian Peng had repeatedly provoked Princess Ding. One could tell that he was an extremely prideful person. Furthermore, he could not tolerate his own failure. Therefore, he would never allow the Mahist army to occupy a piece of land in his territory, especially when she had taken it back from him. Sun Yaowu scratched his head and nodded. That makes sense. Qin Feng smiled and said, General Sun should prepare to defend the city. Once the reinforcements from the northern tribes arrive, things will not be easy for us. Sun Yaowu nodded seriously and said, Don't worry, I will definitely not let the northern tribes take Luo State City from my hands again. The news of Luo State City being occupied by the Mahist army naturally reached Helian Peng's camp very quickly. The generals under him all said that they would immediately send out troops to take back Luo State City. These northern tribe soldiers could be said to be invincible ever since they entered the Central Plains. Even though they had not been able to advance much after encountering the Mahist army last year, overall, they had not suffered any losses. Especially the soldiers in the camp near Spirit Vulture Mountain. They had never encountered the main forces of the Mahist army before. Unknowingly, they began to have a feeling that the Mahist army was just SOSO. At this moment, when they heard that the Luo State City that they had occupied had been silently attacked by the Mahist army, how could they bear it? Naturally, they all clamored to take back Luo State City. Helian Peng was not in a hurry. Although the Mahist army's sudden attack on Luo State City had indeed surprised him, these few days of fighting with the Mahist army had made him much more cautious. If you want to take back Luo State City, we can do so at any time. However, why would Yi Li want to take over Luo State City now? Luo State City is still some distance away from Spirit Vulture Mountain. Even if she takes it over, she will not be able to link it with the place she is defending. Instead, she will need to eliminate more people to defend it. Logically speaking, Yi Li would not make such an unwise decision. Helian Peng said in a low voice. One of his deputies twitched his mouth in disdain and said, That Princess Ding is just a woman, how can she know how to fight? However, no matter what, we cannot let the Mahist army look down on our northern tribe's warriors. Helian Peng's eyes flashed as his lips curled into a cold smile and said, Since that is the case, how about Deputy Cha lead the troops to take back Luo State City? The deputy immediately accepted the order and said, This general guarantees that we will take back Luo State City before tomorrow morning. Helian Peng declined to comment and said indifferently, Wait until you take it back. When the time comes, this general will help you ask His Highness the Seventh Prince for a reward. Although the deputy had a rough temperament, he could still hear the disapproval in Helian Peng's voice. He couldn't help but stare blankly for a moment before accepting the order and turning to leave. After the deputy left, Helian Peng swept his gaze over the people below and said in a cold voice, Immediately go and find out where Yi Li is. The others were all startled. One of them stepped forward and asked, General, are you suspecting that Princess Ding is attacking Luo State City because she is plotting something? Although Helian Peng had just arrived not long ago and was directly ordered by Yelu Yi to take charge of Spirit Vulture Mountain's main camp, his ruthless and fierce methods made many of the officers revere him. No one dared to look down on him because he was still young and had never led an army before. Helian Peng nodded and said, That's right. Rashly attacking a place that isn't of much use isn't Yi Li's style. The other officers didn't agree. How could they know Princess Ding's style of conduct? However, Helian Peng's orders couldn't be discounted. Everyone hurriedly left to carry out the order. Plot? This consort is clearly plotting something. Outside Spirit Vulture Mountain, Yi Li looked down at the distant mountains and rivers with a smile. Behind her stood Zhuo Jing and Lin Han, as well as Zhou Min, who was guarding Spirit Vulture Mountain. Zhou Min asked curiously, Princess, will Helian Peng really fall for it? Yi Li smiled faintly and said, This isn't a question of whether Helian Peng will fall for it. Even if he knows there's a problem, he can only follow the path we've planned. Otherwise, he's prepared to give up the 3 cities near Spirit Vulture Mountain to us. Zhou was silent for a while. She frowned and said, Princess has sent General Sun to take Luozhou City and General He to take Huiyun City. Even if Helian Peng is willing to give up Luozhou, he definitely won't give up Huiyun City. He will definitely send reinforcements there. But, if he does that, Helian Peng will know that our army is empty. What if he... Yili turned to look at Zhou. She sighed helplessly and said, if that's the case, then we can only rely on General Zhou. The Mahist army didn't have many soldiers, but it was a shortcoming. Counting them, the Spirit Vulture Mountain camp had about 30 soldiers. However, there were less than 100,000 Mahist army elites. They were all remnants of the Dechu state and Hisu's soldiers. Hisu's soldiers were considered good compared to the other generals of the Dechu state. However, if it was one-on-one, they still couldn't be compared to the northern tribes. However, this couldn't be blamed on Hisu. Chapter 867. Zhou hesitated and whispered, Princess, why doesn't the prince recruit more troops from the northwest? The military service system in the northwest was slightly different from the other countries. Therefore, the ability to recruit new soldiers was much stronger than the other countries. If Mo Shuyao was willing, he could recruit more than 1 million new soldiers at any time. Moreover, these new soldiers were different from the new recruits. They had more or less received some training. This was somewhat similar to the northern tribes. However, the northern tribes practiced martial arts because of their customs. The northwest was because of the military service system. Every man had to serve in the military for 2 years before they were crowned at the age of 16. Yili smiled and shook her head. Although the northern tribes are brave, they are not enough to compete with the Prince Ding mansion. In the next few years, I'm afraid that the world will not be peaceful. If all the manpower and resources are used up, what will happen in the future? I see. Zhou knew that he did not consider as many things as the prince and princess. He only needed to go forward and fight with the enemy. Since Princess Ding said this, he naturally didn't ask any more questions. Princess Helian Peng just sent 100,000 soldiers to Hui City. A man in black came forward to report. Yili nodded and said, I know. You can leave. After dismissing the man who reported, Yili thought and said, Helian Peng should have more than 400,000 soldiers under his command. He went to reinforce Luozhou and Hui City. He should have at least 200,000 soldiers under his command. Zhou expression was somewhat solemn as she said in a deep voice, Wang Fei, the number of troops in our hands is indeed less than 150,000. Yili waved her hand and said, it doesn't matter. Give up the other 2 camps and only defend the central army. Spirit Vulture Mountain is rugged and easy to defend. As long as we can defend for half a month, it will be enough for Hisu to take Hui City. Even if it doesn't work, I will inform General Yuan Pei. Once Spirit Vulture Mountain falls, he will immediately lead troops out of Feihong Pass to block the way of the northern tribe's army. Although it was risky, if it succeeded, Hisu would occupy Hui City and Sun Yao would occupy Luozhou. They would form a triangle with Spirit Vulture Mountain and surround Helian Peng's army. At that time, Helian Peng would have no choice but to retreat. I understand. I swear to defend Spirit Vulture Mountain. But, Princess, please move to Feihong Pass first? After thinking about it, Zhou asked. It was not that he did not believe that Wang Fei would live and die with the soldiers, but with Wang Fei's status, there was no need for her to take such a risk. Yili nodded and said, no, I believe that General Zhou can defend Spirit Vulture Mountain. Since Yili said so, Zhou couldn't persuade her anymore. He could only secretly make up his mind that he absolutely could not allow Helian Peng to take even half a step into Spirit Vulture Mountain. If she really could not take it, she would send the princess to Feihong Pass even if she had to use force. Soon the area around Spirit Vulture Mountain fell into chaos. Just as Yili and Zhou expected, Helian Peng did not personally rescue Hui City and Luozhou. Instead, he gathered the remaining 200,000 soldiers to attack Spirit Vulture Mountain. In the east, LV Jinshin's troops were in a stalemate for a long time, unable to break through. The middle troops, Yelu Yi and Helian Jin, together led more than 800,000 troops, but they were still no match for Mo Xiuyao's less than 500,000 troops. After fighting for half a month, they lost more than they won. Helpless, they could only retreat. If Helian Peng could open a path from Spirit Vulture Mountain, it would naturally solve the northern tribe's army's current predicament. More importantly, winter came early in the north and it was coming soon. By then, the northern tribe's army supplies would be even more strained than now. Therefore, although Helian Peng knew that Yi Li's arrangement would be disadvantageous to him, He had no choice but to attack Spirit Vulture Mountain with all his might. In front of Spirit Vulture Mountain, both sides had fought for 5 days and both sides had suffered heavy casualties. However, neither side had the slightest intention of retreating. In comparison, this time, the Mahist army was at a disadvantage. At this time, the Mahist army's battle strength was not as good as the Northern Tribe's army. In terms of numbers, they could not compare to the Northern Tribe's army. If not for Spirit Vulture Mountain being easy to defend and hard to attack, the Mahist army would have been defeated long ago. Even so, Hellion Peng was not in a better position than Yi Li and Zhou Min. Although his casualties were less than the Mahist army, he only had 200,000 soldiers under his command. Furthermore, the reinforcements he sent to Luozhou and Hui City had not returned. If the casualties continued, even if he wiped out the entire army at Spirit Vulture Mountain, his remaining soldiers would not be enough to be trampled by the Mahist army at Feihong Pass. At that time, both sides would suffer heavy losses. The worst thing was that Yi Li could afford to be injured. She still had Yuan Pei and the defenders of Feihong Pass behind her. However, Hellion Peng could not afford to be injured. Once Luozhou and Hui City were completely lost, even if he took Spirit Vulture Mountain, he would not dare to go there. Once he went there, he would really become an isolated army. Yi Li. Standing in front of the army, looking at the tired soldiers everywhere, Hellion Peng could not help but grit his teeth. His eyes were filled with a fanatical look. As expected of Princess Ding. I still fell into your trap. But, did you count your own life into this as well? Looking at the black flag of the Mahist army fluttering in the wind on Spirit Vulture Mountain, Hellion Peng laughed coldly. Since things have already come to this, if this general doesn't take down your Spirit Vulture Mountain, wouldn't others laugh at this general's incompetence? Man. General? A general hurried over to wait for orders. Hellion Peng raised his eyes and stared at the hillside not far away. He said in a deep voice, "Continue to attack Spirit Vulture Mountain. You are not allowed to stop until you take it down." The general was stunned. He said with some difficulty, "General, Spirit Vulture Mountain is easy to defend and hard to attack." "I'm afraid." Hellion Peng's cold gaze swept over, causing the general to swallow the words that were about to come out of his mouth. Hellion Peng stared at him and said in a deep voice, "Anyone who dares to retreat will be executed." Yes. On Spirit Vulture Mountain they were also waiting for battle. The atmosphere was filled with blood and tension. Lin Han followed behind Yi Li and followed her to patrol the front line outside the camp. Looking at the groups of soldiers resting together, among which there were many who were injured and could not be treated in time, Lin Han could not help but frown. He looked worriedly at Yi Li who was walking in front of him. He wanted to persuade her to leave earlier, but he could not say anything. Seeing Yi Li coming over, the soldiers who were resting on the ground all wanted to stand up and salute her. Yi Li waved her hand to signal them not to move. She walked to a soldier whose left arm was covered in blood and leaned against a pile of grass to rest. She asked softly, "What happened? Why aren't you bandaging your wound?" That soldier looked to be around 17 or 18 years old. Seeing Yi Li ask him, he blushed slightly and shook his head. In reply to Princess, "My wound is not serious. It's just a scratch. There's no need to bandage it." Yi Li squatted down and raised a hand to pull up his sleeve. The wound was indeed not serious. It was not a fatal wound, but he had lost quite a bit of blood. If it was a normal day, it would not be a problem. However, in the current situation, if he used any force, the wound would probably open even more. Yi Li frowned. She took out a bottle and sprinkled some medicine on his wound. Behind her, Lin Han handed over a cloth towel. Yi Li took it and neatly bandaged the wound. Chapter 868. Looking at the woman in white who was bandaging his wound, the young soldier was stunned. However, he saw that the princess seemed to be very familiar with it. In a moment, the wound was bandaged better than the ones he had seen in the army. Looking at the dazed young soldier, Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "How old are you? Are you afraid?" The youth shook his head and said firmly, "I'm not afraid." Actually, he was still a little afraid. However, the princess was a woman and she was not afraid. As a man, how could he be afraid? Yi Li patted his shoulder and said, "Rest well. There will be a tough battle to fight later." Standing up, Yi Li turned and said to Lin Han, "There is no lack of medicine in the camp. Let the army doctor distribute some medicine to the soldiers. For some of the injuries that are not too serious, let everyone help each other bandage the wounds." "Yes, Princess." Lin Han nodded and pulled a passing soldier to pass on the order. Then he followed behind Yi Li. Seeing him like this, Yi Li said helplessly, I won't be in any danger in the army camp. You don't have to follow me everywhere. Lin Han shook his head and said, the prince has instructed that the princess must have someone to protect her. Yi Li also knew that she could not convince him, so she could only let him go. Just as she was about to turn and leave, she heard a painful groan not far away. Yi Li frowned and turned to walk in that direction. It was a simple shed for the seriously injured. Inside the shed, 2 doctors were discussing something with a young soldier. The groan came from the soldier's mouth. In fact, the cold weapons battlefield in ancient times was far crueler than in her previous life. Naturally, there were no professional field doctors or field nurses to save the wounded on the battlefield. Usually, those who were seriously injured could not escape death in the chaos of war. Occasionally, there would be those who were lucky enough to survive the battle and not be killed by the enemy. They would be dragged back by their own people. But even so, the death rate of the seriously injured who were rescued was shockingly high. It was also because of this that there were not many people who were disabled on the battlefield. How are your injuries? Yi Li asked softly. The 2 doctors turned around and reported helplessly, the arrowhead is stuck in the bone, I'm afraid. The arrowhead couldn't be pulled out. Although it was the leg that was injured, sooner or later the person would die because of the wound festering and other reasons. Yi Li lowered her head to look at the young man lying on the bed. His wound had turned green and was beginning to fester. His young eyes were filled with despair and pain. Yi Li's heart sank. She thought for a moment and asked, is amputation okay? Amputation? The 2 doctors were stunned, but they quickly understood what Yi Li meant. He said with some difficulty, if we cut off this leg, there may be a chance for survival. As long as the wound doesn't fester, there shouldn't be a problem. It's just that. Not everyone could do such a thing. Although they were doctors, they had never done such a thing. There was another experienced military doctor in the camp, but a few days ago he fell seriously ill due to exhaustion and was sent back to Feihong Pass. Yi Li pondered for a moment and said lightly, I'll do it. Princess. Not only the 2 doctors but even Lin Han was shocked. Yi Li said calmly, don't worry, I'll do it. As a special forces soldier in her previous life, Yi Li had naturally learned battlefield rescue. Not only did she treat external injuries, but she had also performed general battlefield surgery. Amputation happened to be one of the most common ones. The 2 doctors were still a little hesitant. Although they couldn't save the wounded man, they couldn't watch the princess do it. The wounded man might be able to live for a few more days. If the princess did it, he might die on the spot. Yi Li walked in front of the young man and said softly, I'm going to cut off your leg that was shot by the arrow. Don't be afraid. A trace of fear rose in the young man's eyes. He wanted to shake his head with difficulty, but the pain from his leg made him unable to say a word. Yi Li looked at him and said in a deep voice, your life is more important than a leg. It's already like this. Are you going to give up your life if you don't even want to gamble? In your home. Is there anyone waiting for you to go back? The young man's eyes were a little dazed, as if he had thought of something. A trace of hope and anger slowly appeared in his eyes. Yi Li said softly, as long as you want to live, you must do your best, even if you have to hold on until the last moment. The young man finally nodded. Although there was still fear in his eyes, he was no longer so flustered. Yi Li stood up and ordered the 2 doctors beside her. Prepare painkillers, hemostatic medicine, clean hot water, strong wine, clean towels and fire. The 2 doctors had no choice but to prepare the things according to Yi Li's orders. When everything was ready, Yi Li took out a thin knife that she had never used before. After wiping it with alcohol, she placed it on the fire for a while before standing next to the young man. She aimed the knife at a certain part of the young man's leg and made a cut. The 2 doctors who were standing on the side stared at Yi Li's movements with wide eyes. They saw that she cut cleanly but with a sense of propriety. At the beginning she was a little unfamiliar, but after 2 or 3 cuts she seemed to gradually get the hang of it. It looked like she was even cleaner than the experienced military doctors. As Yi Li was busy, the sound of war drums suddenly came from outside. In the distance, there was the unique sound of the bugle horn of the northern tribes. It was obvious that the northern tribes' army had started to attack again. Lin Han said worriedly, Princess. Yi Li did not even raise her head. Her hands did not slow down at all as she ordered, Go and tell Zhou Min that everything will be under his command. I will be out soon. Lin Han looked at the injured person on the bed who was in a semi-conscious state and finally turned around to leave. Yi Li finally stopped moving the knife in her hand. She neatly picked up the thread that had been boiled in hot water to suture the wound and bandaged it. After doing all this, Yi Li raised her head and let out a sigh of relief. The two doctors standing on the side were already lost in thought. When they saw Yi Li raise her head to look at them, they came back to their senses and said, "Princess." Yi Li put down the things in her hand and washed her hands in the basin on the side. She said, "The two of you are taking good care of him. The two of you should know more about medicine to clear heat, detoxify, and reduce inflammation than I do. His wound should not be exposed to water. If nothing happens in the next few days, there should be no problem. I will go out first." "Yes. Farewell, Princess." "Don't worry, Princess. This subordinate will take good care of him." The two doctors were a little embarrassed as they repeatedly promised. Yi Li did not care about anything else. She turned and went out of the shed to the battlefield. On the battlefield, Helian Ping did not see Yi Li's figure in the distance. He could not help but frown. He raised his voice and said, "What? Princess Ding was finally afraid and left early?" When he said this, Helian Peng's heart was a little complicated. He did not know whether he hoped that Yi Li had left or that she had not left. Zhou Min snorted and said in a deep voice, "Where our princess is it something that you, a barbarian of the northern tribes, can control?" Chapter 869. Helian Peng's expression darkened and he sneered. This general had thought that Ding Wangfei, whose name shook the world, was some kind of heroine. It turns out that she is just a cowardly woman who fled in the face of battle. I can't be bothered to talk nonsense with a northern tribe's barbarian like you. If you want to fight, then let's fight. Zhou Min pointed her spear at Helian Peng. Helian Peng laughed, "That's good. I'll kill you and then look for your Princess Ding. Charge." After saying that, Helian Peng led the charge up the hill without waiting for the war drums. The soldiers behind him saw their general leading the charge and naturally did not hesitate to charge towards the front of the Mahist army. Zhou Min didn't retreat and snorted, "Kill him?" The Mahist army roared as they released arrows and threw huge logs and rocks. They charged towards the northern tribe's army mercilessly. The northern tribe's army had been attacking for 5 to 6 days and had more or less gathered some experience. This time, there were actually quite a few people who managed to avoid the stones, logs, and arrows raining down from above and rushed up. The Mahist army soldiers charged down without hesitation. The two armies immediately clashed and killed each other. Helian Peng relied on his profound martial arts to fly in Zhou Min's direction. The archers in front did not hesitate to change their target and shot towards Helian Peng, who was in midair. The Mahist army's Black Cloud cavalry were known for their archery skills. Even Helian Peng did not dare to take on dozens of arrows head-on. He flipped in the air and avoided the rain of arrows. He waved his sword and fell back a lot before landing on the ground. Helian Peng laughed and said, "Good archery skills. I would like to experience the archery skills of the Mahist army." Before he finished his sentence, he charged towards Zhou Min again. His qinggong was excellent and his speed was fast. In a moment he was already a few feet away from Zhou Min. He waved his sword and swung it towards the archers. A sharp sword aura rushed towards them. The archers reacted quickly and dodged the attack. However, 2 of them were still injured. Helian Peng did not care about them and turned to attack Zhou Min. Arrows were long-range weapons, but they were useless in close combat. Zhou Min was not afraid. She raised her spear and stabbed it towards Helian Peng. Helian Peng laughed, "General Zhou, you lead the troops well. Unfortunately, your martial arts are still lacking." Zhou Min said coldly, "General Helian, you talk too much nonsense." Helian Peng laughed, "Is that so? Since that is the case, then let me experience General Zhou's martial arts." Zhou Min was a general who received orders to go to war, not a Jianghu expert who fought alone. Compared to Helian Peng, her martial arts skills were naturally inferior. At this time Yi Li, He Su, and Sun Yaowu were not present. The battle ahead was being commanded by Quan Nai and Zhou Min alone. This made him unable to fully concentrate on the enemy. After a few rounds, it was obvious that he was on the losing end. Is he? If she is not here, then you will die today. Zhou Min snorted. She did not care about the cut on her arm. She raised her spear and stabbed it again. Helian Peng jumped up. "If that is the case, then it is a pity. My northern tribes does not have many generals like General Zhou." His long saber emitted a dark red light under the sun. It slashed towards Zhou Min's neck. Zung. A black shadow flashed. Lin Han's face was cold. He raised his sword to block Helian Peng's saber. He said coldly, "If General Helian wants to experience the archery skills of the Mahist army, why are you so impatient?" Helian Peng was startled. He felt a strong wind behind his head. He quickly turned around and dodged. A black arrow just happened to brush past him. The power of this arrow was different from the previous archers. Even if it did not hit him and just brushed past his face, he still felt a slight pain on his face. General Helion is really impatient. This consort is surprised that you would take the lead. Yili stood not far away. She looked at Helion Peng with an indifferent expression. Helion Peng laughed loudly. He looked at Yili and said, "So Princess is still in the army. This general has misunderstood Princess." Yili calmly said, "Don't worry. Since the general is here, there is no harm in staying a little longer. General Zhou, you can go do what you need to do." Zhoumin looked at Yili and Helion Peng. She knew that she could not interfere here. She nodded and turned to leave. Helion Peng raised his eyebrows and smiled. "Princess Ding wants this general to stay. This general is honored." Yili was not in a good mood. She did not joke around with Helion Peng. She calmly said, "That would be for the best." She waved her hand and several arrows shot towards Helion Peng from all directions. Helion Peng hurriedly leaped forward. He swung his blade to cut down the arrows that were shooting towards him. He did not think that just as he cut down the arrows, a strong wind would come from behind him. Even though Helion Peng relied on his strong internal energy to avoid being hit, he was still in a difficult situation. So powerful. Just now, the rain of arrows from the dozen archers did not pose any threat to Helion Peng. But now, the rain of arrows that were not concentrated caused Helion Peng to be flustered. "General, this is the perfect time to see the difference between Qilin and Yazi," Yili said lightly. When Helion Peng finally broke through Qilin's rain of arrows, he was already dozens of paces away from the Mahist army's main camp. Helion Peng looked from afar at the white-clothed woman standing in front of the black-clothed men. He sighed somewhat unwillingly. This one sincerely invites Princess to be a guest in the northern tribes. Why is Princess so ungrateful? Chapter 870. Hearing Helion Peng's words, the corner of Yili's mouth twitched without leaving a trace. She indifferently said, "This consort is also sincerely inviting General Helion to stay for a moment. Why is the general in such a hurry to leave?" Helion Peng looked at the distance between the two of them and felt very helpless. It was not that he was in a hurry to leave, but if he did not leave now, he might not be able to leave. The Qilin of the Mahist army was indeed extraordinary. Helion Peng didn't care about the few black-clothed men by Yi Li's side individually, but when they joined forces, they didn't even make much of a move. Unexpectedly, they already made him feel danger. So he had no choice but to retreat far away. Helion Peng looked regretfully at Yi Li and said, "I heard that the Qilin was personally trained by Princess Ding. It is indeed extraordinary. No wonder Prince Ding dared to charge into the northern militant camp for Princess." Hearing this, Yi Li was stunned. She said in a low voice, "What did you say?" Seeing her reaction, Helion Peng was also stunned. Mo Xiuyao had charged into the northern militant camp alone and caused a bloodbath. Logically speaking, the Mahist army should have announced this a long time ago. How would he know that Mo Xiuyao was afraid that Yi Li would be angry if she found out, so he gave a strict order not to announce this matter. The northern militant army naturally would not bring up such a shameful matter. As a result, Yi Li had not heard any news of this until now. But since he had already said it, Helion Peng did not mind saying more or less. She looked at Yi Li with a smile and said, "A few days ago, Prince Ding single-handedly killed his way through the northern tribe's camp. So, Princess Consort doesn't know about this?" Yi Li's expression darkened slightly. She said lightly, "Thank you, General, for telling me. Now I know." Seeing that Yi Li did not react as he had expected, it was as if what he had just heard was not a big deal. Helion Peng shrugged his shoulders in disappointment. He smiled and said, "It seems that we won't be able to invite Wang Fei today. We have plenty of time in the future. This general wants to see just how long Princess Consort's Spirit Vulture Mountain camp can last." After he finished speaking, Helion Peng didn't stay any longer and flew off to the rear. As the commander-in-chief of an army, he naturally could not leave the battlefield for too long. Lin Han stood next to Yi Li and looked at the expressionless Wang Fei. He said carefully, "Wang Fei, please calm your anger. Since there has been no news from the Central Army, I think that the prince is safe." In order to not let Yi Li know about this matter, Mo Xiuyao not only satisfied Yi Li, but also kept it a secret from everyone in the Spirit Vulture Mountain camp. Therefore Lin Han was as shocked as Yi Li when he heard the news. Yi Li was silent for a moment before she sighed and said, "The battle here is over. Let's go back and talk about it." Rather than saying that Yi Li was angry at Emo Xiaoyao for keeping such an important matter from her, she was more shocked and sad. Yi Li had always known that Emo Xiaoyao treated her extremely well. It could be said that no one in her previous life had treated her as the most important person in his life. No one would believe that Emo Xiaoyao had gone to the northern tribes' camp on a whim this time. Just because she had been attacked by Helian Peng, Emo Xiaoyao had gone to such an extent. Yi Li suddenly regretted leaving the Central Army to come to Spirit Vulture Mountain. Perhaps she should have stayed by his side, however, regret was only a momentary feeling. Yi Li was always rational. She did not think that she was an indispensable existence, but at the same time she knew where to place herself in the situation that was best for the situation. This kind of rationality sometimes seemed cold and indifferent, but wasn't this also another way to help the person he loved? Only by completely ending this battle, only by allowing the Mahist army and the Prince Ding mansion to stabilize, would Emo Xiaoyao's hatred and resentment be completely resolved. Yi Li did not know that while she was worried and conflicted about Emo Xiaoyao was also furious about Yi Li's matter. In the Mahist army's tent, Emo Xiaoyao sat on the main seat with a dark expression. He said in a low voice, "So, Wang Fei and Zhoumin only have 100,000 soldiers and are trapped on the mountain by Helian Peng's 200,000 soldiers?" Everyone was silent for a moment. Marquis Nan stood and said, "Prince, I believe that Wang Fei is not trapped on the mountain. She is trying to buy time for General Sun and General He to destroy the northern tribes' army in Luozhou and Hui City. Once General He and General Sun gain a foothold in the two places, the three sides will surround Helian Peng. Other than being defeated and breaking out, Helian Peng will have no other choice." Feng Jiao also said, "Prince, I think Marquis Nan is right. Also, Spirit Vulture Mountain is easy to defend and hard to attack. It will not be so easy for Helian Peng to take down the camp. In addition, Spirit Vulture Mountain is not far from Feihong Pass. If something really happens, General Yuan Pei will not stand by and do nothing." Emo Xiaoyao naturally did not think of these things. The reason why Feng Jiao said so much was because he was afraid that Emo Xiaoyao would impulsively abandon the 100,000 soldiers and run to Spirit Vulture Mountain. Obviously, Emo Xiaoyao was not as impulsive as he thought. Although his expression was ugly, he did not act impulsively. Feihong Pass's soldiers, Princess Li will not move unless she has no other choice. Feng Jiao, immediately lead 200,000 soldiers to Spirit Vulture Mountain. Emo Xiaoyao said in a low voice. Feng Jiao frowned and said, "No, Prince. If we send 200,000 soldiers to Spirit Vulture Mountain, the main camp will." Feng Jiao believed that with Emo Xiaoyao's ability, 300,000 soldiers would not necessarily be at a disadvantage against 700,000 to 800,000 soldiers of the northern tribes. But that also depended on the time and place. Now that the two armies were facing each other, no matter how strong the Emo family army was, it would be impossible for them to defeat an enemy army that was several times stronger than them. More importantly, it was a waste to send so many elite soldiers to Spirit Vulture Mountain. Emo Xiaoyao naturally knew that his arrangement was not reasonable. After a moment of silence, he waved his hand and signaled for them to take back their words. "If Prince is not worried, how about letting me go to Spirit Vulture Mountain?" Han Mingyue, who was sitting at the end of the line beside Han Mingxi, suddenly spoke up. Everyone was stunned. The old officials of the Prince Ding mansion all knew that Prince Ding and young Master Mingyu were good friends, although they did not know why they fell out. But in the past few years, Prince Ding's attitude towards young Master Mingyu was clear to everyone. To say that he did not care was an understatement. If not for Han Mingxi's face, young Master Mingyu would not have a place in Glass City. Even though young Master Mingyu's abilities were far superior to the current head of the Prince Ding mansion, Han Mingyue had always been treated as if she did not exist. Everything was handed over to Han Mingxi and Han Mingxi would be discussed with him. To the extent that young Master Mingyu did not have any power or status, but still had to help his younger brother clean up his messes. It was also because of this that even though Han Mingyue and Han Mingxi had always been inseparable, Han Mingyue had never expressed any opinions in public. Now that she had suddenly spoken up, everyone was rather surprised. Marquis Nan and the others didn't know anything about the grudge between Han Mingyue and Emo Xiaoyao. Only now did they remember that this young Master Mingyue was also a stunning figure back then, and their eyes couldn't help but light up. Chapter 871. Emo Xiaoyao snorted softly and was about to refuse, intending to send Feng Jiao to bring people to bring Yi Li back. Han Mingyue smiled faintly and said, "I know nothing about war. However, when it comes to saving people, I am more skilled than Feng Zhiyao. Han Mingyue's martial arts were superior to Feng Zhiyao's, and more importantly, he was not a subordinate of the Prince Ding mansion. If Yi Li refused to leave in a time of crisis, even Feng Zhiyao would be helpless. However, Han Mingyue did not have such concerns. Even if he had to use force, Han Mingyue's chances of winning were much higher than Feng Zhiyao's. Mo Xiao's mind turned and he nodded, "All right, you go. Han Mingxi will stay." If anything happened to Yi Li, I would immediately skin Han Mingxi alive. Seeing Mo Xiao's threatening gaze, Han Mingyue did not mind and smiled faintly. "That's all, I will leave after making some preparations." Actually, Mo Xiao's worries were unnecessary. Based on Han Mingxi's feelings for Yi Li, he would not harm Yi Li. After all, in this world, he only had Mingxi as his family. Han Mingxi's mouth moved, but he held back and did not speak. Not only was he worried about Yi Li, but also because this matter was an excellent opportunity for his elder brother's situation. As long as Han Mingyue could protect Yi Li's safety, the relationship between Prince Ding and his elder brother should be much better. All these years, he had watched his elder brother work so hard for him without getting anything in return. In the eyes of outsiders, it was as if young Master Mingyu was dependent on him, his younger brother. It wasn't that Han Mingxi wasn't guilty. Su Zuidi had been dead for so many years, so it was enough for her to be punished for so many years. He didn't expect his elder brother and Prince Ding's relationship to return to how it used to be. There were many things that couldn't be mended once they were broken. However, at the very least, it would allow Big Brother to receive fair treatment or allow him to go wherever he wanted to go. "Big Brother, be careful." Han Mingxi looked at Han Mingyue and said. Han Mingyue smiled faintly and waved her hand, indicating that he didn't need to worry about it. She turned around and left the tent. Feng Zhiyao watched as Han Mingyue's clothes disappeared from the entrance of the tent. He couldn't help but sigh in his heart. Back then, because of Su Zuidi, the outstanding young Master Mingyu had fallen to such a state. His former good brother, Prince Ding, wasn't any better. For the sake of Princess Ding, he had done a lot of earth-shattering things. The only comparison was that Mo Xiao's foresight was better than Han Mingyue's. The tent was silent for a moment. Mo Xiao said in a low voice, "Pass down Ai's orders. The 3 armies are on standby. Attack the main force of the northern tribes." Everyone's heart trembled. They stood up and replied, "Yes, General." Mo Xiao's lips curved into a cold smile. "Give Yelu Yi a good beating for this prince. This prince wants to see if Helian Peng wants to come and save him." Feeling a cold wind blow through the tent, the generals couldn't help but shiver. It was so cold. On Spirit Vulture Mountain, Yi Li was surprised to see Han Mingyue suddenly appear in front of her. "Young Master Mingyu, why are you suddenly here?" Han Mingyue smiled faintly and said, "Aren't I here on Prince Ding's orders to invite the princess consort to come?" Yi Li didn't hide the suspicion in her eyes. She looked at him with a smile. Han Mingyue shrugged indifferently and said, "Xiaoyao originally wanted to send Feng Zhiyao and 200,000 soldiers to reinforce Spirit Vulture Mountain. Feng San had a hard time persuading him to stay." Yi Li nodded and said, "I believe your words, but I won't go with you." Han Mingyue frowned slightly. Yi Li sighed helplessly and said, "Helian Peng is already in a frenzy. I don't know where he got so many soldiers. Right now, there are no less than 300,000 soldiers surrounding Spirit Vulture Mountain. Once Spirit Vulture Mountain is breached, it's hard to say if he will take the opportunity to send his troops to Hong Pass. Even if he doesn't advance, if he turns around to deal with Hisu and Sun Yawu, they will be completely annihilated." Han Mingyue sighed and said, "So the princess consort plans to stay here and delay him?" Yi Li nodded and said, "The morale of an army in battle is very important. The morale of an army is even more important. As the commander of an army, if I run away at this time, Helian Peng won't even need to attack. I'm afraid it won't be long before the Spirit Vulture Mountain camp is completely defeated." The soldiers here weren't all the resolute and battle-hardened Mahist army. Most of them were the remnants of the Dechu state and the soldiers of the Northern Territory who had just joined the Prince Ding mansion. Han Mingyue looked deeply at Yi Li for a long time. He sighed softly and said, "You really are different from other women. No wonder. Fine, if I can't bring you back, I'll be in trouble. I also want to see how far Princess Ding can go." Yi Li understood his meaning very well. She smiled faintly and said, "Actually, Xiaoyao is too worried. With Qilin here, even if the army is defeated, I won't be in any danger. In a chaotic army, swords and spears have no eyes. In the midst of thousands of soldiers and horses, even a top expert wouldn't dare say that he could escape unscathed. Moreover, Emo Shuyao was too worried about Yili. Being worried about her was a natural thing. Did the prince get hurt when he went to the northern tribe camp? After convincing Han Mingyue, Yili then changed the topic to her own concern. Although she knew that Emo Shuyao was fine, she still couldn't help but want to know more. The people of the Prince Ding mansion hid it from her because of Emo Shioyao's orders. She also didn't want to make things difficult for them. It just so happened that Han Mingyue was someone who didn't need to be restricted by Emo Shioyao. Han Mingyue was a little surprised. She clearly didn't think that Yili would know about this matter. She thought about it again and realized where the problem was. The people of the Prince Ding mansion didn't have the guts to go against Emo Shioyao's orders. Naturally, it was an outsider who leaked the information. She calmly explained the matter from beginning to end. Although Emo Shioyao was injured, those injuries weren't even superficial to them. Only then did Yili truly feel relieved, and the expression on her face eased a lot. Han Mingyue curiously looked at the beautiful woman in white who was sitting on the main seat with a gentle expression. Actually, Han Mingyue wasn't familiar with Yili. Although they had fought a few times, they didn't really have a serious conversation. If he was still Emo Shioyao's best friend, perhaps he would also become good friends with this Princess Ding. Or perhaps, like the people of the Prince Ding mansion, he would sincerely admire her. But from the beginning he stood on the opposite side of them. Naturally, he didn't have the time to understand this woman. He only felt that Yi Li's appearance, intelligence, methods and skills were all outstanding among women. She was indeed a rare virtuous wife and mother. But he couldn't understand why this gentle and calm woman could make someone like Emo Shioyao so crazy. Actually, this was very easy to understand. It was just like how the world couldn't understand why the stunning Sir Mingyu would ruin his life for Su Zuidi, who only had looks. Love doesn't know where it starts, but it goes deeper. And now, seeing Yi Li sitting on the main seat with a calm expression, but methodically dealing with the various files on the table, Han Mingyue suddenly felt that she understood a little. This woman indeed had a temperament and beauty that was completely different from ordinary women. Chapter 872. Now, I really envy Xiaoyao and Princess, Han Mingyue said with a sigh. Yi Li looked up at him and gave him a puzzled look. Han Mingyue shook his head and smiled without saying anything. Yi Li put down her brush and closed the last booklet. She smiled and said, "There are some things that should be forgotten and let go. If we don't move forward, no one knows if the scenery ahead will be more beautiful than the one behind. What if we can't forget and let go?" Han Mingyue said in a daze. Yi Li thought for a while and said, "In life there are always some things that we can't control. No matter if it's good or bad, when you look back many years later, right or wrong, love or hate, it's just a precious memory in your life. People have to live in the present and look to the future." Looking at Han Mingyue's thoughtful expression, Yi Li suddenly asked, "Does young Master Mingyu have any hatred in his heart? Does he hate Su Zuidi or Emo Shioyao?" This was all possible. Han Mingyue was a genius, but because of a woman who only knew how to use him, he lost everything. If Su Zuidi was still alive, if Han Mingyue's mind was a little more fragile, Han Mingyue might really hate her to the bone. But Emo Shioyao killed Su Zuidi in the end. Han Mingyue had been under the control of the Prince Ding mansion all these years. Han Mingyue could indeed transfer this hatred to Emo Shioyao. In all these years, very few people mentioned Su Zuidi's name in front of Han Mingyue. But hearing it now, it felt like a lifetime had passed. After a long silence, Han Mingyue shook his head and said with a bitter smile, "Maybe he hates himself? No matter if it's true love or false love, it's all a kind of life experience. If young Master Mingyu had already walked out of this relationship, why would he still cling on to the past and refuse to let go? Was the young master's obsession with the relationship itself or his own sacrifice? The person has already passed away and the feelings have faded. Could it be that young master still wants to continue to sacrifice the rest of his life for this stubbornness?" Yi Li said indifferently. Han Mingyue was silent for a long time before she stood up and said, "Many thanks for Wang Fei's advice. I'm going out for a walk." "Please go ahead, young master." Yi Li did not force her. She had said all that she could say. Whether Han Mingyue would listen or not was not within her scope of consideration. The worst that could happen would be the same as the past few years, with more people secretly taking care of him. With Han Mingxi around, Han Mingyue would not cause too much trouble. On the other hand, the camp of the northern tribes was not peaceful either. In the past few days, Helian Peng had brought his army closer and closer. The Royal House Army's camp had already moved to less than 5 miles away from the foot of the Spirit Vulture Mountain. Although they had yet to conquer the Spirit Vulture Mountain, they had already sealed off all the exits up and down the mountain. Hellion Peng believed that with his hundreds of thousands of soldiers, they would definitely be able to conquer the Spirit Vulture Mountain in 5 days. By then, even if Yili wanted to lead her men to break out of the encirclement, her few men would definitely not be able to break out of the encirclement of hundreds of thousands of soldiers. Thinking of this, Hellion Peng felt that his decision to take the risk of mobilizing all his troops to attack the Spirit Vulture Mountain was the right one. As long as they could conquer the Spirit Vulture Mountain and capture Yili, so what if they lost Luo Prefecture and Hui City? Then wouldn't He Su and Sun Yawu have to obediently give up the 2 cities for the sake of Princess Ding's life? Even if they used it to deal with Mo Xiuyao, it would be the deciding factor. Hellion Peng had been in the northern tribes for a long time, so he didn't know much about the Prince Ding mansion and Yili. Thus, he didn't take Yelu Ye's warning to heart at all. Naturally, he didn't understand why the nobles of the various countries would rather make a move against Mo Xiuyao than touch Yili. If they could successfully capture Princess Ding alive, it would naturally be an excellent trump card. However, Princess Ding wasn't that easy to capture. Secondly, even if they captured Princess Ding, she might not necessarily be alive. Back then, Enchanting didn't want Yili's life, but Yili would rather fall off a cliff and die than let him capture her and threaten Mo Xiuyao. If they really killed Princess Ding, then Mo Xiuyao would probably really go crazy. At that time he would truly not rest until he was dead. Especially after Ren Qining's unfortunate experience, the nobles of the various countries had an unspoken consensus. Unless they killed Mo Xiuyao himself, it was best not to provoke Princess Ding. Yili was the person Mo Xiuyao cared about the most, but that didn't mean she was his weakness. Hellion Peng didn't know what these nobles were thinking, so even after the lesson in the northern tribes camp, Hellion Peng still didn't really give up on capturing Yili. However, he didn't plan to use those underhanded methods. He had openly defeated Yili and captured her. Even Mo Xiuyao couldn't say anything. However, at this time Hellion Peng's expression was somewhat ugly. He had just received an order from Yelu Yi from the northern tribes camp. In the past few days, the northern tribes army had been beaten back repeatedly by Mo Xiuyao. Yelu Yi wanted him to immediately abandon Spirit Vulture Mountain and lead the army to join forces with the northern tribes camp to deal with Mo Xiuyao. How could Hellion Peng tolerate retreating just like that when victory was in sight? General, the 7th Prince's order? The man who came to deliver the order asked. Hellion Peng pondered for a moment, then said, "Go back and report to the 7th Prince. In at most 3 days, this general will be able to capture Princess Ding alive at Spirit Vulture Mountain. At that time we will send reinforcements to the 7th Prince." Hearing this, the man's expression turned ugly. "General Hellion, this is the 7th Prince's order." Regardless of whether the 7th Prince's order was right or wrong, there was a saying that a military order was like a mountain. This Hellion Peng really had guts, daring to reject the 7th Prince's order without even thinking. Hellion Peng said, "This general is about to take Spirit Vulture Mountain. If we retreat now, won't all our efforts be for naught? Go back and report to the 7th Prince. The 7th Prince will definitely understand." The man who delivered the order was furious and angrily said, "How could the 7th Prince not know that the general is attacking Spirit Vulture Mountain? But now that the entire army is retreating, only the general intends to advance. If we fall into Dechu State's hinterland, what use is the general's lone army?" What he didn't say was that if it weren't for Hellion Peng's relentless attacks on Spirit Vulture Mountain, Prince Ding would not have attacked the northern militant camp in such a frenzy. Hellion Peng's expression darkened in displeasure, and he said, "You only need to go back and report this general's words to the 7th Prince. How can a small errand runner like you question the important matters of the army?" The man was furious, but he knew that he couldn't persuade Hellion Peng. He could only snort, turn around and leave the camp. He quickly rode back to the northern militant camp to meet with Yelu Yi. Seeing Hellion Peng drive away Yelu Ye's messenger with just a few words, the generals present all began to worry. Hellion Peng was Hellion Zhen's adopted son, so perhaps it wasn't a big deal. But if the 7th Prince were to blame them as subordinates, they wouldn't be able to bear the consequences. One of the generals stood up and hesitated for a moment before advising, "General, the 7th Prince is urgently summoning us back. Presumably the war situation is urgent. Should we?" Hellion Peng calmly said, "The 7th Prince's camp has 700,000 to 800,000 soldiers and horses. The Mahist army doesn't even have 500,000 men. Presumably we can still afford to wait 2 to 3 days. As long as we quickly take Spirit Vulture Mountain and capture Princess Ding alive, not only will the seventh prince not blame us, he will even be happier to reward you. There's no need to say anything more. Pass down my order, we must take Spirit Vulture Mountain within 3 days. Chapter 873. The others looked at each other. Someone said, but, even if we take Lingjiu Mountain, we may not be able to capture Princess Ding. Princess Ding's subordinate Qilin is very powerful. Even if he cannot defeat the army, it is not a problem for him to protect Princess Ding and escape. Helian Peng's expression was calm as he said, this general only has a suggestion. You all only need to attack Lingjiu Mountain with all your strength. Helian Peng was stubborn and the generals present could not do anything about it. After all, unless Yi Luyi removed him from his position, Helian Peng was still a great general. He was still the commander of their army. They could only listen to his orders. The soldiers on Lingjiu Mountain could clearly feel that the attacks at the foot of the mountain were becoming more and more intense. It was as if something was forcing the brave northern tribe soldiers to charge up the mountain without fear of death. As a result, the pressure on the Mahist army on the mountain increased. After defending the defensive line for almost 24 hours without rest, many of the soldiers' faces were stained with fatigue. But 3 days had passed. Even though the northern tribe soldiers had almost charged up the mountain several times, they were still chased down by the stubborn Mahist army soldiers. Helian Peng was so angry that his eyes were red. He stared at the Mahist army camp on the mountainside where the banners were still flying. His eyes were filled with murderous intent. Princess Ding, immediately have your people surrender. Otherwise, don't blame this general for burning the mountain. Helian Peng's voice came from the foot of the mountain with internal energy. When these words came out, not only the Mahist army on the mountain, even the generals beside Helian Peng were shocked. It was already the end of the 9th month. It was the time when all living things were dying. If Helian Peng really burned the mountain, then it would not only be Lingjiu Mountain that would suffer. On the mountain, Han Mingyue stood by Yi Li's side. She smiled as she looked at the woman in front of her who was as calm as usual. She said, Princess, if we really let Helian Peng set fire to the mountain, we will really be finished. Yi Li smiled faintly and said, with young Master Mingyu's martial arts, how can a mere mountain fire harm young master? Han Mingyue smiled calmly. He was indeed not worried. Even if Helian Peng set the fire, it shouldn't be difficult for him to break out of the encirclement with Yi Li. However, now that the battle had reached this stage, Han Mingyue was really curious about how Yi Li planned to resolve the current predicament. Wang Fei has a way to break Helian Peng's trap? Yi Li shook her head and said, no. There are over 200,000 soldiers at the foot of the mountain. Even if we want to break through, we won't be able to. Then what does Wang Fei plan to do? Yi Li smiled indifferently and said, the one who strikes first gains the advantage. Han Mingyue was stunned. She didn't understand what Yi Li meant. Yi Li looked down at Helian Peng's army camp at the foot of the mountain and leisurely said, when it comes to attacking with fire, it's still. That's the ancestor. After saying this, she didn't care whether Han Mingyue understood or not. Yi Li called Lin Han over and asked, the thing I asked people to prepare yesterday, is it ready? Lin Han nodded and said, reporting to Wang Fei, it's ready. Han Mingyue curiously asked, Wang Fei already knew that Helian Peng would burn down the mountain? Yi Li shook her head and said, I didn't know. It's just that whether or not he planned to burn down the mountain, I was prepared to do so. Otherwise, we wouldn't even be able to hold on for a day. Not long after, Lin Han brought over an object that looked like a lantern. Although the workmanship was simple, Han Mingyue could still see that it was a lantern. She looked at Yi Li in confusion and asked, this thing can't be a lantern, right? Yi Li nodded and smiled, this is indeed a lantern. This is called a Kongming lantern. What can this be used for? Having seen all sorts of exquisite and beautiful lanterns, Han Mingyue didn't think much of the crude lantern in her hands. Yi Li smiled as she held the lantern and said, as for this, young Master Han will know later. Very quickly, Han Mingyue knew what Yi Li was going to do first. After the lanterns were lit, they slowly flew up and floated in the direction of the northern tribe's camp. As it was daytime and they were at war, the many lanterns floating in the sky didn't attract the attention of the northern tribes. Maybe they did notice, but they just didn't care. Yi Li looked on with satisfaction as the Kongming lanterns flew to her predicted location and then slowly landed. Han Mingyue was shocked. The fact that these lanterns could fly was enough to surprise Han Mingyue. Furthermore, they could fly to almost the same side of the sky and land at almost the same time. If not for the fact that she knew that Yi Li was a human, Han Mingyue would have thought that she had used some sorcery. There is a lot of oil in those lanterns. They shouldn't be burned out so quickly. Princess Consort wants to. Han Mingyue quickly understood Yi Li's plan. Yi Li wanted to use these lanterns to scatter the oil on the camp or the people at the foot of the mountain, and then, sure enough, Yi Li shouted, "Release the arrows." Dozens of flaming arrows pierced through the air and shot towards the lanterns that were still in the sky. The moment they touched the arrows, the lanterns immediately ignited and fell from the sky. Hence, the people at the foot of the mountain saw tens of fireballs falling from the sky. Some landed on the people, some landed on the rations in the camp and quickly caught fire. Not long later, the northern tribes' camp at the foot of the mountain turned into a sea of fire. Hence, the northern tribes' army did not have the mood to attack and did not even have the time to save the fire. However, the entire camp was covered in incendiary tung oil, which could be ignited at any moment. How could the fire be put out? Amidst the cheers of the Mahist army, Yi Li ordered, "Go down the mountain from the south and retreat towards Feihong Pass." After this incident, Helian Peng would definitely go crazy with anger. At that time he might really set fire to the mountain. Yi Li naturally would not stay behind and let the tens of thousands of soldiers die for nothing. Hence, while the northern tribes' army was scrambling to put out the fire, the Mahist army had already retreated from the south. Outside the northern tribes' camp, Helian Peng stared at the sea of fire in front of him. Yi Li, I will definitely kill you. General, the Mahist army on the mountain has retreated. The scout at the front hurriedly reported. Helian Peng's expression changed. Where did they retreat to? The scout replied, they seem to be retreating towards Feihong Pass. Chase. Helian Peng ordered. General. The few generals' expressions turned ugly. Originally, they were not convinced by this general who appeared out of nowhere. But Helian Peng was too powerful and they did not dare to say anything. But now the camp was burned and their rations were gone. What could they use to chase the Mahist army? There were still more than 200,000 soldiers waiting at Feihong Pass. Furthermore, the Mahist army was not a mix of elites and remnant soldiers. They were all the most elite soldiers of the Mahist army. No matter how powerful Helian Peng was, he would not be able to take them down without 10 days to half a month. And now, they did not even know where the rations were for tomorrow. Chapter 874. Our army's rations have all been burned and we cannot fight anymore. General, please reconsider. The generals advised. Helian Peng's face turned black. How could he not know that their rations had all been burned? However, he could not take it lying down after being tricked by Yi Li. He said in a low voice, collect rations from the people nearby. The northern tribe's army's rations were just putting it nicely. It was more like snatching rations. However, there were not many people in the north. Even if there were, they would have retreated behind the Mahist army. Even if they wanted to snatch rations, how much could they get? They might not even be able to gather enough rations to feed a few 100,000 soldiers. General Helian, I feel that we should retreat to the north immediately and meet up with the 7th Prince and old General Helian. One of the generals said firmly. Helian Peng's face darkened as he said, chase after them. If we can't catch them, we can't let them leave just like that. Helplessly, a few of the generals with strong attitudes left with their men. Only a few generals who were still following Helian Peng led less than 100,000 soldiers to chase after them. Helian Peng looked at the army camp that had turned into a sea of fire. The red light reflected on his face, making him look extremely terrifying. The remaining few thousand soldiers of the Mahist army were not cavalrymen. Naturally, they would not be able to move quickly. On the other hand, most of the northern tribe soldiers were retreating. It did not take long for them to catch up with the Mahist army. Helian Peng stared at Yi Li without the usual carefree and arrogant gaze. Princess Ding, I did not want to hurt you at first. However, you asked for it this time. Yi Li did not mind his words and said indifferently, when two armies fight, the victor and loser are both responsible. General Helian, aren't you being a sore loser? The veins on Helian Peng's face popped out. Good. Ever since I led the army, all of them have been defeated by Princess Ding. Today you and I will fight to the death. Yi Li shook her head indifferently and smiled. I know that General Helian was personally groomed by General Helian Zhen, a talent of the northern tribes. Unfortunately, there is a word in the Central Plains that I wonder if General Helian has heard of? Helian Peng stared at her coldly and said, I was just about to ask for your advice. Yi Li smiled faintly. Talk on paper. Yi Li, you are too arrogant. Helian Peng was furious. He had learned the language of the Central Plains quite well, so he naturally knew what this word meant. Yi was actually mocking him for not knowing how to use of troops. Yi looked at his furious expression and raised her eyebrows. General Helion, you don't have to think that I'm humiliating you. Although you've been learning from Helion Zhen since you were young, you've never led a single celestial soldier before. Helion Shi, you are Helion. Forgive Yi for speaking bluntly, but there are many people in the Mo family army who are better than you when it comes to commanding troops. If you did not have the advantage of troops, do you think you could have one? Helion Peng's face turned white and purple. After a long time he laughed coldly. Fine. So what if I don't know how to lead troops? You will still die here today. He did not give Yi a chance to speak. He raised his sword and charged towards Yi. Han Mingyue, who was beside Yi, unsheathed her sword and blocked Helion Peng's sword. Helion Peng had seen Han Mingyue in the northern tribe's camp. She dared to charge into the northern tribe's camp to rescue Mo Xiaoyao. Her martial arts were not weak. Who are you? Han Mingyue smiled and cupped her hands. I am Han Mingyue. Greetings to General Helion. Young Master Mingyue? Helion Peng was from the northern tribes, but his master was from the central plains. Although Murong Xiong was old, he still knew about the famous martial arts experts in the central plains. However, Han Mingyue had not appeared in the outside world for many years. Other than the people in the Prince Ding mansion, many people thought that young Master Mingyue had either retired or died. Han Mingyue smiled. Yes, I am. Helion Peng sneered. I don't care what kind of young master you are. Those who block me will die. I would like to experience your skills. Han Mingyue smiled. Helion Peng did not say a word and directly attacked. Han Mingyue did not hold back. She waved her sword to meet the attack. Han Mingyue was able to call Mo Xiaoyao good friends. She was also able to control the world's #1 intelligence organization, the Tianyi Pavilion. Her martial arts were naturally outstanding. Although she was not as good as the world's top 4 experts, she was not inferior to Helion Peng. When the two of them started fighting, it was naturally hard for them to separate. Helion Peng was in a hurry to capture or kill Yi, but Han Mingyue was not in a hurry. He only needed to block Helion Peng and prevent him from hurting Yi, so the battle was very easy. On the other side, Lin Han was protecting Yi as they watched the battle. Lin Han asked, Princess, should we help young Master Mingyue? Yi shook her head and smiled. Young Master Mingyue's martial arts are not inferior to Helion Peng's. If we act rashly, we will only cause trouble for him. Lin Han thought for a moment and nodded in agreement. Looking around, a new battlefield had formed around them. The northern tribe soldiers and the Mahist army soldiers were already engaged in a battle of life and death. Right now, the two sides were evenly matched in terms of military strength. In a close combat battle, there was no need to care about formations or military tactics. If this battle continued, it would only end with both sides suffering heavy losses and perishing together. Lin Han was about to persuade Yi to leave first when the earth-shattering sound of horse hooves came from afar. Lin Han was slightly startled. When he tilted his head to listen, he could not help but exclaim, Princess, it's General Yuan Pei's men. That was from the direction of the Feihong Pass. Those who could come from there were naturally Yuan Pei's men. Yi nodded and looked up. After a while, a black flag with the Mahist army's mark appeared on the ground in the distance. Countless black horses were galloping in this direction. Looking back at the Mahist army soldiers who were still fighting, Yi could not help but reveal a relaxed smile. Chapter 875. The Black Cloud Cavalry swept through the entire battlefield like a black whirlwind. Old General Yuan Pei, whose hair and beard were all white, was still vigorous despite his age. He personally led his troops over on his warhorse. Seeing that Yi was safe and sound, he clearly let out a sigh of relief. This general greets the princess. Yi hurriedly reached out to support Yuan Pei, who was about to kneel down. She smiled and said, Old General, there is no need to be so courteous. It's all thanks to you that you felt it. Yuan Pei stood up and said with a smile, This general is only leading the troops to provide support. Princess, you have been bitterly guarding Spirit Vulture Mountain these past few days. This general admires you. Seeing the old general's serious expression, Yi couldn't help but smile and say, Let's wait until this battle is over before we praise each other. Yuan Pei also couldn't help but smile. He looked towards Helion Peng, who was still fighting with Han Mingyue. His expression changed as he said, That kid is Helion Zhen's son? He truly has some guts. The Mahist army's hatred for Helion Zhen far exceeded anyone else's. Since Helian Peng was Helian Zhen's son, he naturally couldn't avoid being implicated. Yi Li smiled and said, "He really is Helian Zhen's adopted son." Yuan Pei nodded and said, "Very good. Back then this old man didn't have the opportunity to meet Helian Zhen. Today I'll capture his son and see what he has to say." Helian Peng and Han Mingyue were fighting. Han Mingyue's expression was relaxed and casual. He didn't have any thoughts of winning, so he naturally wasn't in a rush. Meanwhile, Helian Peng saw that he and Han Mingyue couldn't determine a victor in a short amount of time and was secretly anxious. However, Han Mingyue's martial arts weren't something that he could fight and leave as he wished. When the Black Cloud cavalry arrived in front of him, Helian Peng knew that the situation was hopeless. No matter how unwilling he was, he knew that if he didn't leave now, he wouldn't be able to. Steeling his heart, he used all his strength to slash at Han Mingyue several times. Such a desperate posture made Han Mingyue somewhat flustered for a moment. Only then did Helian Peng take the opportunity to shake off Han Mingyue and retreat into the distance. "Princess Ding, I'll have a taste of Princess Ding's brilliant moves in the future." Landing on a horse, Helian Peng lifted the reins and galloped north. The northern tribe soldiers who were fighting with the Mahist army also retreated when they saw that their commander had left. When Yuan Pei saw this, he wanted to command his troops to chase after them, but he was stopped by Yi Li. "Helian Peng has at least 100,000 troops under his command. There's no need to chase them too quickly. Yi Su and the others should be back by now." When Yuan Pei heard Yi Li's words, he had no choice but to stop. He still had the heavy responsibility of guarding Feihong Pass and could not spend his time fighting with Helian Peng. Helian Peng brought the remaining troops and retreated, but on the way he was intercepted by Yi Su, who had just returned from taking Hui City to reinforce Spirit Vulture Mountain. Behind them, Yi Li, who had reorganized her troops, chased after them. Under the pincer attack, Helian Peng suffered a great loss. In the end, he could only bring the remaining troops back to the northern tribe's camp. After defeating Helian Peng, Yi Li left Zhou Min behind to guard the West Army, while she brought Yi Su and Sun Yawu back to the Mahist army camp. In the northern tribe's camp, Yelu Yi glared at Helian Peng, who was kneeling in the middle of the tent. He was enraged. "You brought back only a few 100,000 men for I? Helian Peng, you're really something. You dare to disobey I's orders. Who do you think you are?" Yelu Yi was angry not only because Helian Peng's men had suffered heavy losses, but also because the northern tribe's camp had suffered more losses than Helian Peng. However, Helian Peng's disobedience had given Yelu Yi a good excuse to vent his anger. Hence, the first thing Helian Peng did when he returned was to be scolded by Yelu Yi. No commander-in-chief would like such reckless subordinates. Helian Zhen's expression was also ugly. Helian Peng was his adopted son and was taught by him. Yelu Yi scolding Helian Peng in front of him was a slap to Helian Zhen's face, but this time, it was Helian Peng's fault. Even if Helian Zhen wanted to plead, he could not say anything. After Yelu Yi finished venting, Helian Zhen said, "Seventh Highness, the Mahist army is at its peak now. It's useless for us to vent our anger here." In the past few days, the Mahist army had been like a hot knife through butter. The northern tribe's army had been forced to retreat more than 200 miles. If not, Yelu Yi would not have been in such a hurry to call Helian Peng's army back. Who knew that Helian Peng would disobey orders and cause more than 200,000 soldiers to die in Spirit Vulture Mountain? "Uncle, what do you think?" Yelu Yi suppressed the anger in his heart and asked in a low voice. Helian Zhen did not know what to do. In the past, Helian Zhen was able to defeat the Mahist army mostly because he had obtained the Mahist army's map first. However, the Mahist army now was not the Mahist army of 10 years ago. There was also no retarded Chu emperor who could give them a map to stab the Mahist army in the back. After thinking for a long time, Helian Zhen said in a low voice, "The Mahist army's achievements are outstanding. I'm afraid it will be difficult for us to take them down alone. We need a partner." "Partner?" Yelu Yi frowned. "Who can we partner with now? The north has been destroyed and the western tomb. Mo Jingli is eyeing the south. I'm afraid that Lei Jinting will not fight the Mahist army in the short term." Helian Zhen said in a low voice, "Then we'll pull the western tomb and the Dechu state together. Lei Jinting will know that once the northern tribes are finished, the western tomb will be the next to face the Mahist army. If we can destroy the Mahist army first, he will definitely agree." Hearing this, Yelu Yi could not help but think. After a while he asked, "Even so, what should we do about Mo Jingli? Once Lei Jinting and the Mahist army fight, Mo Jingli will definitely cross the Yinlan River and attack the western tomb. At that time all our efforts will be for naught." Helian Peng said, The enmity between Mo Jingli and Mo Xiaoyao is no less than ours. If we can persuade him, we can just give him some benefits after destroying the Mahist army." Hearing Helian Peng's words, Yelu Yi was also somewhat moved. He had met Mo Jingli a few times and naturally had some understanding of him. He had great ambitions but was short-sighted and his abilities were average. If they could give him enough benefits, he might really be able to join hands with them to deal with Mo Xiaoyao. However, the benefits that they could give Mo Jingli must come from Lei Jinting. Therefore, they needed someone who could persuade Genom of Gojoseon to help Lei Jinting. However, Lei Jinting was not as easy to deal with as Mo Jingli. "Uncle, do you have anyone in mind who can persuade Lei Jinting?" There were not many people in the northern tribes who were good at talking. At this moment, Yelu Yi could not think of anyone to send to persuade Lei Jinting. Helian Zhen smiled and said, "I am willing to go personally." Yelu Yi frowned slightly and looked at Helian Zhen with worry in his eyes. After so many years, Yelu Yi gradually felt that this uncle of his was no longer like the winged cavalry general who dominated the northern tribes. On the contrary, he was gradually becoming more like a politician of the Central Plains. Although he hated Mo Xiaoyao to the bone, he seemed to have given up on the idea of defeating Mo Xiaoyao fair and square on the battlefield. At this moment, Yelu Yi did not know whether this was good or bad. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.